When my voice meant nothing, I spoke, and no one heard me. I used to believe that effort was sacred. That honesty was loud enough to break walls, that if I spoke with enough truth in my lungs, the world would lean in and listen. I believed that if my words were clean, they would be welcomed, that if my intentions were pure, they would be seen, that if I showed up every day with fire in my chest and faith in my voice, anyone would hear me. I was wrong. I spoke softly at first, not because I was weak, but because I thought respect lived in restraint. I thought wisdom whispered. I thought strength didn't need to shout. I believed the world rewarded patience, that it noticed the ones who waited their turn, that it honored those who didn't force their way into the room. So I waited. I spoke when invited. I chose my words carefully. I polished them with sincerity and sent them forward like offerings. They fell to the floor every time. I spoke with hope in my throat, hope that trembled but refused to die. Hope that said, "This time they'll understand." Hope that said, "This time they'll see me." I spoke with hunger, not the shallow kind, not the kind that begs, the deep hunger of someone who knows they are meant for more but hasn't been given the map. I spoke with raw intent, unfiltered, unarmored. I spoke without masks because I believed truth was armor enough. And still nothing. No nods, no silence heavy with thought, no resistance even, just absence. It's a special kind of pain to speak and not be interrupted. Not because you're respected, but because you're irrelevant. I was present but unseen, standing in rooms where my shadow didn't even bother to show up, sitting at tables where my chair might as well have been empty. I existed in the background of my own life. I watched others speak with half the conviction and twice the noise, and the world applauded. I watched empty words dressed in confidence get crowned as truth. I watched lies delivered loudly become law. And I stood there with truth bleeding in my hands, wondering why it wasn't enough. I thought maybe I needed to explain better, so I spoke longer. I gave context. I showed my work. I opened my chest and said, "Here, this is me. This is real." They looked through me. I thought maybe I needed to simplify, so I cut my thoughts down to bone. Short sentences, clear meaning, no room for misunderstanding. Still nothing. I thought maybe I was too intense. So I softened, I smiled more. I apologized for things that weren't sins. I dimmed my edges so I wouldn't scare anyone. They still didn't listen. That's when it began to sink in, not as a realization, as a wound. The truth no one teaches you is this: being ignored hurts more than being hated. Hatred at least admits you exist. Hatred looks you in the eye. Hatred says, "I see you and I reject you." But indifference erases you. I was shouting into a void that never echoed back. Not even a whisper, not even a distorted return of my own voice. Just silence, endless, mocking. I started to question the sound of my own thoughts. I wondered if my voice was broken, if something about me bent the air wrong, if my words dissolved the moment they left my mouth. I would speak, and it was as if the universe swallowed the sound whole. No reaction. No resistance, no proof that I had ever spoken at all. I began to feel like a ghost haunting rooms full of the living. Watching conversations happen around me, not with me. Watching decisions get made without my presence ever being acknowledged. I was there. I was always there. But presence means nothing when no one feels it. I told myself it was temporary. That patience would be rewarded. That consistency would build weight. I told myself, keep going, keep speaking. Someone will notice. That lie kept me alive longer than it should have. I kept showing up with the same faith, the same belief, the same quiet fire. And every time I spoke, it died a little more. Do you know what it does to a person to pour their truth into the air and watch it evaporate? To speak from the gut and receive nothing in return? No challenge, no disagreement, no acknowledgement, nothing. It teaches you a dangerous lesson. It teaches you that your voice doesn't matter. I started measuring my worth in reactions, in eye contact, in interruptions. and when none came, I shrank, not because I wanted to, but because silence is heavy. And when you carry it long enough, it bends your spine. I began to speak less, not out of wisdom, out of exhaustion. Each word felt like lifting a weight no one else could see. Each sentence drained me because I already knew how it would end. Silence. I told myself I didn't need to be heard. That self-validation was enough. That power didn't require witnesses. That was another lie, because even the strongest flame needs oxygen, and mine was suffocating. I watched the world reward volume over value, confidence over competence, noise over truth, and I wondered where that left someone like me, someone who believed words were sacred, someone who believed speaking meant something. I started doubting my instincts, my thoughts, my very perception of reality. If no one reacts to your truth, you start to question if it's true at all. I replayed conversations in my head, analyzed every sentence, every pause, every breath. Did I say it wrong? Did I wait too long? Did I speak too softly? The blame always landed on me, because it had to, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was accepting that the world doesn't care how real you are, only how loud you are willing to be. And I wasn't ready to accept that yet, so I kept believing. I believed that goodness was currency. That effort stacked up like interest. That one day, all this unseen labor would pay off. I believed in a system that did not believe in me. I spoke with hope even when it started to taste bitter. I spoke with hunger even when it turned to ache. I spoke with intent even as my voice cracked under the weight of being ignored. Every word felt like a risk, a gamble I kept losing. And still I spoke, because silence felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. I remember moments where I could feel the words clawing at my chest, begging to be released, not to impress, not to dominate, just to exist. I remember speaking truths that could have changed things if anyone had listened. But the void doesn't argue. It doesn't push back. It doesn't even mock you openly. It just waits and lets you exhaust yourself. That's the cruelty of it. You don't even get the dignity of opposition. You just fade. I started to feel transparent, like light passed through me without resistance, like I left no imprint on the air. I would walk away from conversations feeling smaller than when I entered. Not because I was defeated, but because I was unseen. There is a loneliness deeper than isolation. It's being surrounded and still unheard. That was my reality, day after day, room after room, voice after voice, mine lost in the noise of a world that wasn't listening. And somewhere in that silence, something began to crack, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, a fracture in belief, a hairline break in faith, the belief that honesty was enough, the belief that effort mattered. The belief that the world rewarded those who spoke from the soul. Those beliefs didn't shatter yet, they weakened. And weakness, when ignored long enough, becomes something else entirely. But that comes later. For now, understand this, I didn't start out angry. I didn't start out defiant. I didn't start out wanting to dominate. I started out believing that my voice mattered. And when no one listened, when every word vanished into the void, when my presence meant nothing, that belief began to die. Slowly, painfully, silently, just like my voice, explaining myself until I disappeared, so I tried a different strategy. I explained myself. I thought maybe silence wasn't the problem. Maybe confusion was. Maybe they didn't ignore me because they didn't care. Maybe they ignored me because they didn't understand. That idea gave me hope, and hope is dangerous. So I started translating my pain, breaking it down into smaller, safer pieces. I softened the sharp edges of my truth so it wouldn't cut anyone. I explained why things hurt me, where the scars came from, what I meant, what I didn't mean, what I feared they might misunderstand. I explained my intentions. Over and over again, I said I'm not attacking, I'm just trying to be honest. I said I don't want control, I want clarity. I said I'm not angry, I'm passionate. I explained my dreams like they were fragile objects, holding them out carefully, afraid someone might drop them, afraid someone might laugh. I said this matters to me. I said this is who I am. I said this is where I'm trying to go. And every time I explained, something strange happened. They listened longer, but they respected me less, because I confused vulnerability with weakness. I thought opening my chest would make them see my strength, but all they saw was an opening. I thought honesty would earn trust, but it only invited judgment, so I explained more. When they questioned me, I clarified. When they doubted me, I justified. When they misunderstood, I apologized. Even when I was right, I kept talking. I explained my boundaries instead of enforcing them. I explained my values instead of standing on them. I explained my pain instead of letting it speak for itself. And every explanation took something from me. A little certainty, a little confidence, a little weight in my voice. I started shrinking my identity so it could fit inside their understanding. I edited myself in real time, cutting sentences short, swallowing thoughts halfway through. I removed the parts of me that made people uncomfortable, the intensity, the fire, the refusal to settle. I became easier to digest, less threatening, more agreeable. I told myself this was maturity. I told myself this was growth. I told myself this was what strong people do. But strong people don't disappear. I did. The more I explained, the less solid I felt, like I was dissolving into my own words, like my identity was being diluted with every clarification. I wasn't speaking anymore. I was negotiating my existence. I started asking permission to feel, permission to want more, permission to be hurt. I started justifying my emotions before I even expressed them. I know this sounds dramatic, but I might be wrong, but I don't want to be a problem, but do you hear that? That's the sound of a voice apologizing for existing. I kept talking. I kept losing. I lost the sharpness of my truth. I lost the authority in my tone. I lost the instinct that once told me when to stop explaining. Because I thought if I could just find the right words, the perfect phrasing, the most reasonable tone, they would finally accept me. They didn't. They took my explanations and used them against me. They took my vulnerability and rebranded it as instability. They took my openness and called it neediness. And I stood there, confused, because I had done everything right. I had communicated, I had been honest, I had been patient, and still I was shrinking. I began to feel lighter in the worst way, not free, hollow, like a person made of air. I would walk away from conversations feeling erased, not attacked, not challenged, reduced, as if every word I spoke shaved something off me. As if my identity was sanded down until nothing sharp remained. I kept explaining because I was afraid of silence, afraid that if I stopped talking, I would disappear completely. But here's the truth no one warned me about. Explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you is a form of self-destruction. Every explanation said, your judgment matters more than my truth. Every clarification said, convince me I deserve to exist. Every apology said, I am smaller than your comfort. I kept talking. I kept losing. Until one day I didn't recognize the voice speaking anymore. It sounded unsure, thin, distant, like it belonged to someone who had spent too long asking to be understood instead of deciding to be undeniable. That's when it hit me. I wasn't unheard because I wasn't clear. I was unheard because I was bending. And the more I bent, the easier it was for them to look past me. Because the world doesn't listen to voices that are busy explaining themselves away. And in that realization, something dark began to stir. Not anger yet, something colder, something quieter. The first instinct to stop explaining. The first instinct to stop shrinking. The first instinct to let silence become a weapon instead of a wound. I didn't act on it yet, but it was there, waiting. They listened only to what served them. That's when I noticed something worse than silence. They were listening. Just not to me. They listened the way predators listen. Not for truth, not for meaning, but for leverage. They heard what served them, and they ignored the rest. Every sentence I spoke became a hunting ground. They didn't hear the whole thought. They waited for a fragment they could use. One word out of context. One emotion taken out of sequence. One moment of honesty ripped from the spine of its meaning. And suddenly, my voice wasn't mine anymore. They twisted it. I would say one thing. They would repeat another. I would speak with clarity. They would respond with accusation. I would explain pain. They would hear weakness. I would name a boundary. They would call it selfishness. I wasn't being judged by my truth. I was being judged by the pieces they decided to keep. And those pieces were always the sharpest ones. Never the intention, never the full picture, never the context. Only the parts that made me easier to control. They didn't want to understand me. They wanted to define me. Because when you define someone, you cage them. And when you cage someone, you don't have to fear them. So they listened selectively. Like judges who already made their verdict, they nodded at the parts that benefited them. They ignored the parts that challenged them. They rewrote the rest. I would walk away from conversations thinking I had been clear, only to realize later that my words had been rearranged into weapons, used against me, thrown back at me, stripped of their original meaning. They would say, "That's not what you said," even when I knew it was. They would say, "You're being dramatic," even when I was calm. They would say, "You're overreacting," even when I was restrained. Slowly, subtly, they began to edit my reality. That's the quiet cruelty of it. Not loud lies, soft distortions. They never said, "You're wrong." They said, "Are you sure?" They never said, "You're lying." They said, "That's not how I remember it." They planted doubt like poison seeds, and I watered them. I started second-guessing my own memory, my own tone, my own intentions. I replayed conversations again and again, wondering how my words could be so easily misused. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. Maybe I spoke too emotionally. Maybe I should have chosen different words. That's how it works. They don't attack your strength directly. They erode your certainty. They make you question your perception until you hand them the authority to define reality for you. I was being emotionally gaslit in slow motion. And the most dangerous part, it didn't look like abuse. It looked like misunderstanding. It didn't sound cruel. It sounded reasonable. Calm voices, measured responses, plausible deniability wrapped in politeness. They smiled while they did it. I would speak my truth and they would say, "You're taking it the wrong way." I would express pain and they would say, "That wasn't my intention." I would call out behavior and they would say, "You're projecting." And suddenly I was the problem, not because I was wrong, but because I was isolated. Because when your words are constantly reframed by others, you start to lose faith in your own voice. I felt like I was standing in a room full of mirrors, each one reflecting a distorted version of me. Too sensitive, too intense, too complicated, too much, never enough. They judged me by fragments, by moments frozen out of time, by sentences stripped of emotion and intent. They never judged the whole of me, because the whole of me was dangerous. The whole of me had clarity. The whole of me had power, so they broke it down, piece by piece. They turned my openness into evidence, my honesty into ammunition, my words into traps I didn't know I had built. And every time I tried to correct them, they accused me of changing the story. I was trapped in a loop. Speak and be twisted. Stay silent and be defined. That's when I realized something chilling. They didn't want my voice gone. They wanted it controlled. Because a silenced person might disappear. But a distorted person can be used to reinforce their narrative, used to justify their behavior, used as proof that they were right all along. I wasn't dealing with misunderstanding. I was dealing with manipulation. Quiet, calculated, precise. and the longer it went on, the clearer it became. They were never confused, they were selective. They listened only to what served them, and everything else was disposable. That realization didn't explode, it settled. Like a blade sliding into place. For the first time, I stopped asking, why don't they understand me? And started asking, why would they? Understanding me would mean losing control. Understanding me would mean accountability. Understanding me would mean facing truths they didn't want to face. So they twisted my words instead. And in that moment, something hardened inside me. Not hatred, awareness. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that watches. The kind that remembers. Because once you see manipulation for what it is, you can never unsee it. And once you stop trying to correct lies, you start preparing to become something they can't distort. Not yet, but soon. Mockery disguised as advice, and then came the smiles. The soft ones, the practiced ones, the kind that curve upward while the eyes stay cold. They didn't mock me openly. That would have been honest. They mocked me gently, politely, with concern in their voice and poison in their words. They called it advice. They leaned in and said, I just want to help you. They lowered their tone like wisdom lives in a whisper. They spoke slowly as if I needed things simplified. They didn't laugh out loud. They laughed inside. I could feel it. It lived in the pause before they spoke, in the way they tilted their head, in the way they smiled just a little too long. They said things like, you have potential, but you're passionate, but you're talented, but there was always a but. And after that but, they shrank me. They told me to be realistic. They told me to slow down. They told me not to aim so high. They said it was for my own good. They said, I don't want you to get hurt. They said, I've seen people like you before. They said, trust me, I know how this ends. Authority wrapped in doubt, experience weaponized against ambition. They spoke like gatekeepers pretending to be guardians, and I listened. Because when someone speaks with confidence, you assume they earned it. I didn't realize they were threatened. They disguised limitation as wisdom, fear as foresight, insecurity as guidance. They smiled while they did it. They laughed behind their teeth. They treated my fire like a phase, like something I would outgrow, like something that needed to be tamed before it embarrassed me. They patted my ambition on the head and told me the world doesn't work that way. They told me to pick something smaller, something safer, something more appropriate, as if destiny asks permission, as if hunger can be negotiated. They said people like us don't do things like that. They said, be grateful for what you already have. They said, don't rock the boat. They never said, you're wrong. They said, you'll understand when you're older. They said, you'll see it differently with time. They spoke down to me while pretending to lift me up. That's the cruelty of condescension. It doesn't attack your strength. It questions your judgment. It makes you feel foolish for dreaming, naive for wanting more, arrogant for believing in yourself. And the laughter, it was always subtle. A breath through the nose, a shared glance with someone else, a smile that said, this one doesn't know their place yet. They laughed at my seriousness, at my intensity, at the way I refused to play small. They called it passion management. They called it maturity. They called it realism. I call it fear, because only fearful people need others to stay beneath them. The worst part wasn't the words, it was who they came from. People with titles, people with status. People whose approval carried weight. They dismissed me without ever truly listening, measured me by standards they never questioned, decided my limits before I had even begun. They spoke like they were protecting me from failure, when really they were protecting themselves from competition. And I felt it, deep in my chest, a tightness, a pressure, something coiling. At first, I swallowed it. I nodded. I thanked them. I smiled back. I told myself they meant well. I told myself they were experienced. I told myself I should be grateful for their guidance. But every time they spoke, something inside me burned. Not loudly. Not yet. It was a low heat, a simmer. The kind that doesn't explode, the kind that waits. I began to notice the pattern. They never mocked those who played it safe. They never advised those who stayed small. They never laughed at mediocrity. They only smiled like that when someone threatened the order, when someone refused to accept the limits they had accepted. That's when it hit me. Their advice wasn't about my future. It was about preserving their comfort. They needed me to doubt myself. They needed me to hesitate. They needed me to stay manageable, because if I rose, their authority would crack. And that realization lit the first real spark of rage. Not blind rage, not reckless anger, controlled, focused. The kind of rage that sharpens instead of consumes. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of my ambition. I felt offended by their restraint. For the first time, I didn't question my hunger. I questioned their fear. I stopped hearing concern in their voices. I started hearing warning signs. They weren't trying to help me survive. They were trying to make sure I never became a threat. And in that moment, something shifted. I stopped shrinking under their smiles. I stopped nodding at their limits. I stopped confusing their comfort with my destiny. I didn't confront them. I didn't argue. I did something far more dangerous. I remembered. Every laugh hidden behind a smile, every dismissal dressed as wisdom, every ceiling they tried to lower over my head, I let it settle. And for the first time, the fire inside me wasn't just pain. It was resolve, quiet, unapologetic, patient. Because mockery disguised as advice doesn't break you, it reveals who deserves to be left behind. And I was done listening to people who mistook my potential for a problem they needed to manage. The rage had spoken, not out loud, but it was awake now. And it was hungry. The first time I felt the weight of silence, there came a moment when my voice was tired. Not hoarse, not broken, tired of explaining, tired of correcting, tired of defending a truth that never needed permission. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a collapse, it was exhaustion so deep it felt calm. I remember the moment clearly, not as a memory, but as a shift. Someone spoke. They twisted something again, softly, casually. The familiar invitation was there. The opening to respond, to clarify, to fix the misunderstanding. My body prepared for it out of habit. My mouth almost moved, and then I didn't. For the first time, I chose not to answer, not out of fear, not out of defeat, out of depletion. I had nothing left to prove. The silence fell between us like a held breath, not awkward, heavy. I expected the familiar panic to rise, that urge to fill the space, that fear of being misunderstood. It didn't come. Instead, something else appeared. Relief, not the gentle kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that whispers you don't owe them this. I let the silence stretch. Seconds felt longer. The air felt thicker. They shifted. They waited. And for the first time, they felt what I had been carrying, the weight, because silence isn't empty. Silence is pressure. Words release tension. Silence concentrates it. I had spent so long bleeding my power through explanations that I never realized how much strength I was leaking. And now, for the first time, I stopped the bleeding. I didn't correct them. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just watched, and something fascinating happened. They started talking, not with confidence, with discomfort. They filled the space I refused to fill. They explained themselves. They justified. They backtracked. I said nothing, and the balance shifted. I could feel it, like a room that suddenly realizes who actually controls the temperature. That was the moment I understood. Silence doesn't weaken you. It pressurizes everything around you. When you speak too much, you equalize tension. When you go quiet, tension has nowhere to go. It builds. I had always been afraid of silence. Afraid it meant surrender. Afraid it meant invisibility. I was wrong. Silence is not absence, it's restraint. And restraint is power. I started noticing it everywhere. The ones who spoke the least were rarely the weakest. The ones who rushed to explain were usually defending something fragile. The ones who stayed quiet made others reveal themselves. Silence became a mirror. and people don't like what they see when no one interrupts them. I felt the weight of it settle into my spine, not heavy like a burden, heavy like armor. For the first time, my stillness had mass. I realized how much noise I had been making trying to be understood, and how little noise was actually required to be felt. I stopped responding immediately. I stopped correcting assumptions. I stopped chasing clarity from people who thrived on confusion. I let them sit with their words, and they hated it, because silence removes their control. No reaction means no leverage. No explanation means no entry point. They couldn't twist what I didn't say. They couldn't use my words against me if I didn't give them any. And in that quiet, my thoughts sharpened. I could hear myself again, not the filtered version. Not the edited one, the real voice, the one that didn't apologize for existing, the one that didn't beg to be understood. I realized how loud my presence actually was when I stopped trying to announce it. Silence made people lean in. It made them guess. It made them uncomfortable. And discomfort reveals truth. I saw impatience. I saw insecurity. I saw fear dressed up as confidence. All of it exposed because I refused to fill the space. That was the moment exhaustion turned into strategy. I wasn't tired anymore. I was deliberate. Every unspoken word became a choice. Every pause became a statement. I learned that silence has texture, weight, intent. It can be merciful or it can be merciless. And I was done being merciful. I didn't announce this shift. I didn't warn anyone. I just stopped reacting. And the world around me grew louder, trying to compensate. Questions came faster. Accusations sharper. Attempts to provoke more obvious. They wanted me back in the old role, explaining, defending, justifying. I stayed quiet, and the power imbalance terrified them, because silence doesn't ask, it observes. Silence doesn't chase, it waits. And waiting is something only the confident can afford. I felt taller, not physically, internally, rooted. For the first time, my strength wasn't in my words, it was in my restraint. I understood something then, something irreversible. They never deserved my explanations. They only benefited from them. My silence was not weakness. It was compression, pressure building behind steel. And pressure, when released, doesn't whisper, it devastates. That was the first time I felt the true weight of silence, not as emptiness, as force, as potential, as a warning. Because from that moment on, every word I chose to speak would matter, and every word I chose to withhold would matter even more. The voice that once begged to be heard had learned something far more dangerous. How to be felt without saying a single word. And once you learn that, you never speak the same way again. Silence was not surrender. They thought I quit when I went quiet. They smiled, not with relief, with victory. They mistook my stillness for collapse, my restraint for retreat, my silence for surrender. They thought I quit. I saw it in their posture, in the way they spoke my name less carefully, in the confidence they gained when my voice stopped interrupting their comfort. They assumed the pressure finally crushed me. That the weight was too much, that I folded. They were wrong, but I let them believe it. Rumors began to move faster than truth ever had. Whispers wrapped in certainty. Assumptions dressed as facts. They couldn't handle it. They burned out. They realized they weren't cut out for this. They finally accepted reality. Reality, that word again. Always used by people who mistake limits for laws. They dismissed me casually, like a closed chapter, like a lesson learned. They spoke about me in past tense while I was still breathing, and something remarkable happened. I felt free. Because when people stop watching you closely, you regain your shadow. When they stop expecting anything from you, you are released from their narrative. Underestimation is a quiet gift. An unlocked door, a blindfold placed willingly on the enemy. They stopped guarding their words around me, stopped measuring their actions, stopped pretending. They revealed themselves. I listened. I watched them build confidence on a lie. I watched them relax into arrogance. I watched them mistake absence for weakness. They didn't know silence had sharpened me. They didn't know stillness had given me room to grow without interference, to think without noise, to decide without pressure. While they talked, I was recalibrating. While they celebrated my disappearance, I was consolidating power. They thought I had lost momentum. What I lost was distraction. I wasn't wasting energy reacting anymore. I wasn't bleeding strength into arguments that went nowhere. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I was rebuilding privately. That's the danger of assuming someone is finished just because they're quiet. Some battles are loud, others are surgical. They didn't see the work happening beneath the surface. They didn't feel the shift in gravity. They just saw silence and wrote my ending for me. They underestimated how much clarity comes when you stop performing for approval. I no longer needed to be liked or understood or validated. I only needed to be precise. And precision thrives in silence. I let them talk, let them assume, let them dismiss. Every rumor lowered their guard. Every assumption made them careless. Every laugh at my expense made the eventual truth heavier. They forgot something fundamental. People who quit usually announce it. They explain, they justify. I did none of that because I didn't quit, I withdrew. There's a difference. Quitting is surrender, withdrawal is repositioning, and I had chosen my ground carefully. I could feel the shift in how they treated me, less cautious, more dismissive. They spoke over me now, around me, about me, as if I were already gone, and that invisibility became a weapon. I moved without resistance, planned without interference, strengthened without scrutiny. I learned things I was never meant to hear, saw truths that would have stayed hidden if they still considered me a threat. Underestimation stripped them bare. They revealed their fears, their alliances, their weaknesses, all because they thought the danger had passed. They were celebrating too early. I felt no urge to correct them, no need to announce my presence. Let them believe the story they wrote, because stories make people predictable, and predictability is exploitable. They said my silence meant defeat, that I couldn't keep up, that I broke under pressure. They confused restraint with fear. I let them. Because the most dangerous move is allowing your enemy to misjudge you completely. They never asked why I stopped speaking. They never considered that silence could be intentional. That was their mistake. I had found something more powerful than confrontation. Control over my energy, control over my timing, control over what parts of me the world had access to. I no longer reacted on their schedule. I moved on mine, and time favors the patient. They thought they were standing over my grave. They didn't realize they were standing on a fault line. Pressure doesn't disappear when it goes quiet. It accumulates, it compresses, and when it moves, it doesn't warn you. They mistook peace for passivity, stillness for stagnation, but I was anything but still. I was coiled, focused, ready. I didn't need to announce my return. I didn't need to demand recognition. When I move again, they will feel it, not because I speak louder, but because I strike cleaner. They thought I quit. That belief will cost them everything, because when someone underestimates your silence, they underestimate your depth. And depth is where the pressure lives, the kind that reshapes landscapes, the kind that turns calm into catastrophe. Let them keep believing I'm gone. Let them keep dismissing what they no longer hear. Silence was not my surrender, it was my advantage, and soon they'll understand the difference. Watching them reveal themselves, silence became my mirror, not for me, for them. When I stopped interrupting, when I stopped correcting, when I stopped reacting, they filled the space with themselves. That's the thing about unchallenged people. They always tell on themselves. At first it was subtle, small shifts, loose tongues. They spoke more freely when they thought I was no longer a factor. Their voices lost caution. Their words lost discipline. They assumed no one was listening. I was listening. Silence sharpened my hearing. I noticed how quickly confidence turned into carelessness, how easily certainty slid into arrogance, how often truth was replaced by convenience. When no one pushes back, intentions rise to the surface. People reveal who they are when they think they've already won. I watched patterns form. The same people who preached fairness always benefited from imbalance. The same voices that claimed neutrality always leaned toward power. The same ones who spoke about unity thrived on division. I didn't need to accuse them. Their behavior confessed for them. Silence doesn't distort truth, it removes interference. I watched how they treated others when they thought no one important was watching. I watched who they protected, who they dismissed, who they sacrificed without hesitation. I watched how rules changed depending on who was breaking them. And suddenly the chaos made sense. This wasn't randomness. It was design. They weren't confused. They were consistent. Consistency is the fingerprint of intent, and once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. I stopped asking why things felt wrong and started seeing how things were engineered. Who spoke first? Who benefited last? Who was always blamed? It was all there, laid bare by my refusal to interfere. They mistook my silence for absence, so they dropped the mask. They spoke in half-truths now. They joked about things that shouldn't be jokes. They revealed priorities they once pretended not to have. They showed me what they valued: control, comfort, image, never truth, never growth, never justice. And the more they talked, the clearer it became. They weren't villains in their own minds. They were heroes protecting their version of order. That's the most dangerous kind. People who believe they're righteous never question the damage they cause. Silence gave me the distance to see that clearly. I wasn't dealing with chaos. I was dealing with systems. Systems built by people who never thought they'd be examined. I watched alliances shift behind smiles. I watched loyalty dissolve under pressure. I watched principles bend when tested. And I took notes, not on paper, in memory, because memory is a weapon when sharpened by observation. Patterns repeated, excuses recycled, different faces, same behaviors. That's when it happened. The awakening, not emotional, not explosive, intellectual, cold, clean. I stopped seeing individuals and started seeing mechanisms. I stopped reacting to moments and started anticipating outcomes. That's villain intelligence, not rage, foresight. I knew who would speak before they opened their mouth. I knew who would betray before loyalty was tested. I knew who would fold the moment pressure arrived, because people are predictable when you let them be themselves long enough. Silence gave them permission, and they used it to expose everything. I learned who thrived on chaos and who needed stability, who wanted power and who wanted proximity to it, who feared change and who pretended to welcome it. They revealed their ceilings, their breaking points, their tells. I stopped seeing people as obstacles. I started seeing them as variables, and variables can be accounted for. The fear I once felt around them disappeared, because fear comes from uncertainty, and silence had given me clarity. I wasn't surrounded by mystery anymore. I was surrounded by patterns, and patterns can be broken or exploited. I realized then this wasn't about being heard anymore. This was about understanding the board, and I could see the entire board now. Every move they made confirmed what they were. Every word they spoke reduced the unknown. They thought my silence meant disengagement. It meant surveillance. They thought I had stopped caring. I had started calculating. There's a moment when empathy turns into strategy, when patience becomes preparation. That was my moment. I no longer needed to confront lies. I understood why they existed. I no longer needed to challenge authority. I understood how it was maintained. I had stepped outside the emotional fog and into something far more lethal: clarity without attachment. That's when power stops being loud. That's when it becomes inevitable. They showed me their hand, all of it, and they never realized they were being watched by someone who had finally learned the value of silence. I didn't interrupt their reveal. I let it finish. Because once people show you who they are completely, you don't argue with it, you plan. And the moment I finished seeing them clearly, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer reacting to the world they controlled. I was preparing to move through it with precision they would never see coming. Silence had done its work. The mirror had done its job, and the intelligence it awakened would not forget what it had learned. I learned who needed noise to feel powerful. Silence taught me something brutal, not about myself, about them. I learned who needed noise to feel powerful, the loud ones. The constant talkers, the ones who filled every pause like silence might expose them. They mistook volume for authority, motion for momentum, attention for respect. They were always speaking, always announcing, always reminding the room that they existed, because without noise they faded. I used to think confidence sounded like certainty, clear, measured, grounded. I was wrong. Confidence doesn't shout, insecurity does. The loudest people in the room were never the strongest. They were the most afraid of being ignored. They needed reactions, approval, resistance. They needed an audience. Without eyes on them, their power evaporated. I saw it clearly once I stopped feeding it. When I stopped responding, they got louder. When I stopped reacting, they escalated. They raised their voices, their opinions, their certainty, not because they were right, but because they were desperate, desperate to feel significant. They disguised fragile egos as confidence, wrapped insecurity in dominance, dressed fear up as authority. They spoke over others, interrupted constantly, corrected things that didn't need correction, not to add value, to assert presence. They couldn't stand the idea that power might exist quietly, because if power could be silent, what did that make them? I watched them unravel when no one challenged them. At first, they enjoyed it. They mistook my silence for submission, so they talked more. They repeated themselves. They exaggerated. They performed. They told stories louder, took credit faster, dismissed others more openly. They needed to dominate the space because they couldn't dominate themselves. Silence stripped the illusion. Without resistance, their words had no friction, and without friction, they slid. Their confidence began to look thin, over-rehearsed, hollow. They laughed too hard at their own jokes. They waited for reactions that didn't come. They glanced around, searching for affirmation. I gave them none, and the mask started to crack. They mistook quiet strength for absence of strength. That mistake exposed them, because people who are truly powerful don't need to be heard constantly. They choose when to speak. They choose when to remain still. They don't chase attention. Attention finds them. The loud ones didn't understand that. They needed noise the way addicts need a fix. Noise to feel real. Noise to feel relevant. Noise to drown out doubt. Without it, they became restless, agitated. I could see it in their movements, their impatience, their compulsive need to fill space. Silence made them uncomfortable, because silence asks questions, and they didn't have answers. I saw egos collapse in real time, not dramatically, subtly. They began to contradict themselves, overcompensate, expose cracks they didn't know existed. Their authority depended on reaction. Take away the reaction and you take away the illusion. That's when I understood some people don't want power. They want the feeling of power, and feelings require stimulation. Applause, fear, debate, silence starves them. I watch them try to provoke me. Sharper comments, passive insults, veiled challenges. They wanted engagement. They wanted conflict, because conflict would make them feel alive again. I denied them that, and the desperation showed. They needed me loud so they could feel louder. They needed me reactive so they could feel dominant. They needed noise because without it, they had nothing. Silence stripped away the stage lights, and under that harsh clarity, they looked small. I learned to recognize it instantly. The ones who talk the most listen the least. The ones who assert constantly doubt themselves quietly. The ones who demand respect rarely command it. Their power was performative. Mine was internal. They needed to be seen. I needed to be effective. And effectiveness doesn't announce itself. It moves silently. I stopped mistaking volume for strength. Stopped mistaking confidence for competence. Stopped mistaking noise for impact. I saw the pattern everywhere. Meetings, conversations, hierarchies. The loudest voice was usually compensating. The quietest presence was usually calculating. Silence peeled the paint off their personas. What remained was fragile, brittle, afraid of being irrelevant. They feared what I had learned to embrace, that you don't need to dominate the room to control the outcome. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need noise to be powerful. In fact, the less you need it, the more dangerous you become. I stopped engaging with noise. Stopped competing with volume. I let them exhaust themselves, and exhaustion reveals truth. Their confidence was conditional, dependent, borrowed. Mine didn't need witnesses. Silence had stripped away every illusion, and in that clarity I understood something final. The ones who fear silence are terrified of what they might hear when no one is applauding. I wasn't afraid anymore because I had already listened, and what I found in the quiet was not weakness. It was certainty, unshakable. Unspoken, unbreakable. Let them keep shouting. Let them keep performing. I no longer mistake noise for power. I know exactly where power lives now, and it doesn't make a sound until it's too late to stop it. Restraint sharpened me. Restraint didn't weaken me. It sharpened me. There was a time when every insult pulled a reaction out of me. Every betrayal demanded a response. Every challenge lit a fire that burned without direction. I mistook reaction for strength. I thought power was immediate, explosive, uncontrolled. I was wrong. Real power waits, not because it is afraid, but because it is precise. I learned to stop reacting, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had everything to lose by speaking too soon. Restraint became my discipline. Every time I swallowed a reaction, I gained control. Every time I stayed still when provoked, I learned something new about myself. I discovered how loud my impulses were, how desperate my ego was to be validated, to be seen, to be right. Restraint forced me to confront that voice, the one that wanted revenge immediately, the one that craved confrontation, the one that wanted chaos just to feel powerful. I didn't silence it. I trained it. I let the rage speak inside me, and I listened, not to obey it, but to understand it. Rage isn't evil. Uncontrolled rage is. I realized my anger wasn't random. It was information. It showed me where I was still vulnerable, where words could still cut, where pride still bled. So I stopped acting on it. I started refining it. Each moment of restraint was a lesson. I learned how to pause my breath, slow my pulse, anchor myself in clarity. While they expected explosions, I gave them nothing. And that terrified them, because they couldn't read me anymore. Restraint turned me opaque, unpredictable, dangerous in a way noise never could be. Inside, the dialogue changed. It used to be loud, chaotic, a war of impulses screaming for control. Now it was sharp, focused, purposeful. I ask myself different questions. Not how do I strike back, but when is the right moment? Not how do I hurt them, but how do I win? Restraint taught me patience, and patience taught me leverage. I began to see further. While others burned energy reacting to every spark, I conserved mine. I watched patterns repeat. Provocations followed scripts. Manipulations recycled tactics. They thought they were clever. They weren't. They were predictable. And predictability is weakness. My restraint wasn't passive. It was deliberate. Every unspoken word became stored energy. Every suppressed reaction became focus. I felt myself changing, not softer, sharper, calmer, more lethal in intent. Rage didn't disappear. It matured. It stopped screaming. It started calculating. I learned that rage is most powerful when it is quiet, when it waits, when it chooses the exact moment to move. Restraint gave my anger direction. Instead of burning me from the inside, it became fuel. Controlled, contained, purposeful. I stopped being ruled by emotion. I started commanding it. That shift changed everything. I no longer feared provocation. I welcomed it, because each attempt to rattle me only reinforced my discipline. They tried harder, they escalated, they crossed lines, and I stayed still, not because I couldn't react, because I didn't need to. And that imbalance drove them mad. They expected fire, they got ice. They expected chaos, they got silence. They expected weakness. They got restraint, and restraint unnerves those who rely on reaction, because they can't measure it, they can't control it, they can't predict it. I felt the transformation take hold. My mind became a weapon, not impulsive, not reckless, refined. I learned to sit with discomfort, with injustice, with disrespect, not forever, just long enough to understand the battlefield, long enough to see where power truly lived. Restraint didn't mean forgiveness, it meant timing. It meant choosing the moment that mattered. It meant acting from clarity, not emotion. I wasn't less dangerous, I was more, because now when I move, it's intentional. Every word lands heavier, every action cuts deeper, because it is chosen, not forced, not reactive, controlled. Rage without restraint destroys itself. Rage with discipline reshapes the world. I became disciplined, not out of fear, out of ambition. I wanted more than release. I wanted results. Restraint taught me that power doesn't rush. Power waits, power watches, power strikes when resistance is useless. I am no longer ruled by the moment. I rule the outcome. That is what restraint gave me, not silence, not suppression, precision. And once rage is refined into control, nothing can provoke you into losing your advantage. Nothing can bait you into weakness. Nothing can steal your power. I don't react anymore. I decide. And that decision is what makes me unstoppable. Silence became a weapon. They couldn't see. Silence stopped being empty. It became heavy. It pressed against them in ways they couldn't name, couldn't fight, couldn't escape, because they were trained for noise, for arguments, for reactions they could counter. They weren't trained for nothing. I learned that the absence of response creates pressure, unspoken pressure, the kind that crawls into the mind and refuses to leave. When I stopped explaining myself, they started explaining me. When I stopped defending my name, they started doubting their own stories. Silence bent the space between us. It created imbalance. They talked more. I listened. They overplayed their hands. I folded mine. And in that imbalance, power shifted. They felt it before they understood it, because silence doesn't announce itself. It infiltrates. It forces people to sit with their own thoughts, their own intentions, their own guilt. I didn't need to accuse anyone. Their minds did that work for me. Every unanswered message, every ignored provocation, every calm refusal to engage, it echoed louder than rage ever could. They wondered, why isn't he reacting? Why isn't he angry? Why isn't he breaking? Questions turned into unease. Unease turned into obsession, because silence denies closure. And the human mind hates open loops. They wanted confirmation, that they mattered, that they hurt me, that they still had control. Silence gave them nothing, and nothing is terrifying. I watched them grow restless. They mistook my quiet for ignorance at first, then weakness, then fear, until none of those explanations fit anymore. Because weakness doesn't stay calm under pressure. Fear doesn't remain composed. Ignorance doesn't observe so precisely. Something was changing. The battlefield moved. It was no longer external. It shifted inward, into their heads. They started second-guessing every move. Every word they said felt too loud. Every action felt exposed. Because silence makes noise visible. It strips away distractions. It magnifies intention. When no one pushes back, people reveal why they push in the first place. And they didn't like what they saw in themselves. I didn't threaten them. I didn't confront them. I let silence do what force never could. It destabilized them. They filled the void with assumptions, with fear, with projections. They started fighting shadows, and I didn't need to move. Silence allowed me to control tempo, to slow everything down. While they rushed, I waited. While they escalated, I observed. While they exhausted themselves trying to provoke a response, I grew stronger, calmer, sharper. They thought the battle was still about words. It was about control of space, mental space, emotional space, psychological territory. Silence claimed all of it. Every moment I didn't react, I took ground. Every second I stayed composed, they lost footing. Because rage needs friction, egos need resistance. Without it, they collapse inward. I saw it happen. Confidence cracked. Certainty dissolved. They began contradicting themselves, over-explaining, justifying things no one accused them of. Silence had turned into a mirror, and they were trapped staring into it. I didn't enjoy it. I understood it. This was the cost of underestimating quiet strength. They were prepared to fight a monster. They weren't prepared to fight absence. Silence doesn't bleed. Silence doesn't flinch. Silence waits. And waiting rewires the power dynamic. I felt it inside me too. The battlefield shifted internally. My heart rate slowed. My thoughts aligned. I stopped feeling pulled into other people's chaos. Silence gave me sovereignty. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was orchestrating, without commands, without declarations, without noise. They couldn't tell when I would move or if I ever would. And uncertainty is the greatest destabilizer of all. They tried to provoke harder, louder, meaner. But desperation always exposes itself, and silence exposes desperation mercilessly. I became unreadable, unreachable, untouchable in ways that mattered, because they could no longer predict my limits or my intentions or my breaking point. Silence removed their leverage. Every tactic they relied on required response, emotion, validation, engagement. Silence starved them, and starving tactics die. They felt the imbalance grow. Something was wrong. The rules had changed. They just didn't know how. Silence didn't make me invisible. It made me dominant, because dominance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it lets the enemy collapse under the weight of their own noise. I didn't need to announce my power. They felt it. In the way conversations ended awkwardly. In the way rooms shifted when I stayed quiet. In the way they kept checking for reactions that never came. Silence became a weapon they couldn't see. And because they couldn't see it, they couldn't defend against it. That is the beauty of invisible strength. It works whether you're believed or not. It reshapes outcomes quietly, relentlessly. I didn't take the battlefield by force. I let it drift into my control. And by the time they realized silence wasn't absence, it was intention. The balance was already broken, and it was never going back. I stopped seeking permission. I stopped asking. I stopped waiting. I stopped seeking permission from anyone, because no one ever truly had it to give. For years, I measured myself against expectations I didn't choose, against standards that weren't mine, against voices that weren't meant to guide me. I thought approval was the gateway to power, the key to respect, the ticket to survival. I was wrong. Approval is a leash disguised as a gift, a chain wrapped in smiles, a cage they call encouragement. Every nod I chased, every validation I craved, I handed my power away. Piece by piece, moment by moment, and in the silence I realized it. No one's approval could define me. No one's judgment could break me. No one's expectations could limit me. I began to detach, not with rebellion, not with defiance for its own sake, but with clarity, with precision. I stopped letting their whispers dictate my direction. I stopped letting their doubts dictate my value. I stopped letting their fears dictate my choices. And in that stillness, I discovered something radical: freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't need applause, doesn't need permission slips, doesn't ask for consent. I chose myself, not in arrogance, not in ego, but in necessity. I chose to define my own boundaries, to construct my own path, to write my own rules. I stopped shrinking to fit into their vision. I stopped softening to soothe their discomfort. I stopped editing my ambitions to make them comfortable. Every time I considered asking, I reminded myself, I don't need their approval. I need my conviction. Every step I took without asking became a declaration. Every decision I made for myself became a fortress. Every boundary I held became a weapon against manipulation. Identity isn't given, it isn't borrowed, it isn't confirmed by applause or acknowledgement. Identity is forged, molded in silence, hardened in solitude, refined in the refusal to bend to anything but truth. I rebuilt myself in the quiet moments they weren't paying attention, in the spaces where their opinions couldn't reach me, in the pauses where I no longer sought validation. I stopped apologizing for ambition. I stopped disguising my strength as humility. I stopped deferring to comfort when courage demanded action. Every approval I didn't chase was a brick in my own foundation. Every rejection I ignored was steel in my spine. Every doubt I silenced in myself became fuel. I discovered that seeking permission is the root of weakness. It's the chain around every unfulfilled dream, the handcuff on every unclaimed destiny, and I tore it off. The first time I didn't ask, I felt exposed, vulnerable, alone in the eyes of those who had always dictated my worth. But the more I didn't ask, the lighter I became, the more expansive, the more unstoppable. I didn't just stop seeking permission. I stopped allowing their definitions to shape my world. I stopped letting their fears dictate my courage. I stopped letting their limits define my horizon. I redefined myself, not in their terms, but in mine. I reclaimed the narrative that had been written over my life. I rewrote the margins. I erased the footnotes. I destroyed the parentheses that made my existence optional. I learned that self-definition isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't beg for acknowledgement. It simply exists, and it commands respect by presence alone. I chose identity over approval, action over hesitation, truth over expectation. Every time I acted without asking, every time I moved without consent, I strengthened the core of who I am, the part of me that cannot be shaken, cannot be negotiated with, cannot be silenced. Permission is weakness disguised as courtesy. I refused it. I refused them. I refused the idea that anyone could authorize my existence, and in that refusal, I became untouchable. Because once you stop asking, once you stop waiting, once you stop bending to accommodate the comfort of others, you realize the only authority that matters is the one you grant yourself. I am my own ruler, my own standard, my own judge, my own liberator. Every whisper of doubt, every shadow of hesitation, every echo of past approval lost its power over me. I moved through the world unchained, unrestricted, unapologetic. I stopped seeking permission, and in that choice I found the first true taste of invincibility. Look at yourself, look at the scars, the doubts, the times you shrank to make someone else comfortable. Do you see weakness, or do you see proof that you survived long enough to reclaim your own voice? I am proof. I am declaration. I am the authority I was always waiting for. And from this moment forward, I answer only to myself. I measure only by my standards. I move only by my will. No permission. No approval, no compromise, only power, unrelenting, undeniable. Mine. Pain became instruction. Pain is honest. Pain doesn't lie, it doesn't flatter, it doesn't pretend to be less than it is. I learned that the hard way. Betrayal struck me first like lightning, blinding, sudden, impossible to ignore. It tore through what I thought was certainty, through the walls I built around my trust, through the armor I thought was unbreakable. I wanted revenge. I wanted to scream. I wanted the world to recognize the injustice done to me. But that fire, pain, didn't burn me. It began to teach me. Every lie I was told became a lesson. Every hand that pushed me down became a guidepost. Every betrayal was a map of human weakness. Every deception a blueprint of caution. I realized something crucial. Pain isn't punishment. Pain is education. And the only grade that matters is what you learn from it. I remember thinking I had been destroyed. I remember thinking I had lost, but destruction is only real if you surrender. I did not surrender. I felt every cut, every scar etched itself into my mind. Every humiliation carved a deeper edge into my spirit. And slowly, imperceptibly, I began to understand the value of it. Suffering refines. It tests the raw metal of your being. It stretches your limits and exposes your flaws. It exposes your strength too, if you are paying attention. I became the student of my own pain. I asked questions others would never dare. What is the lesson here? Where is the advantage in this suffering? How can this fire shape me instead of consume me? And then I watched it work. The same betrayal that threatened to break me, the same cruelty that tried to erase me, the same injustice that mocked my worth, they all forged me. I became steel tempered in fire. I became sharper, harder, more resilient. I was molded not by kindness, not by ease, but by the exact pressure that was meant to crush me. Pain demanded attention. It demanded presence. It demanded adaptation. I listened, I learned, I evolved. Every wound became a teacher. Every failure became a text. Every betrayal became a syllabus I could not ignore. And I started to see patterns. The ways people lie, the ways people betray, the weaknesses they expose when they think no one is watching. I studied them like a general studying the battlefield. Every experience, every knife in the back, every sneer of judgment, an intelligence gathering mission disguised as suffering. I no longer hated the pain. I welcomed it, not with joy, not with satisfaction, but with respect, because fire forges steel, pain is fire, and I am steel. Every moment of suffering, every sting of betrayal, every ache of rejection hardened me where softness once lived. Strength isn't given, it isn't inherited. It is forged in the places most people fear to enter. The lessons were brutal, they were merciless, but they were effective. I stopped blaming, I stopped cursing, I stopped wasting energy wishing it hadn't happened. Instead, I extracted instruction. I analyzed, I integrated, I applied. Pain became my mentor, suffering became my curriculum, betrayal became my syllabus. And I passed every test, not because it was easy, not because it was fair, but because I refused to fail. I began to anticipate, I began to prepare. I began to act with precision instead of reaction. Every scar became a tool, every tear became a compass, every wound became insight. I stopped fearing fire. I stopped flinching at heat. I stopped imagining that the blows were meant to destroy me. They were meant to instruct me. And now I walk through the world differently, not because the pain is gone, it never is. It never leaves, but because I've learned to carry it, to use it, to wield it. I am sharper because of it. I am stronger because of it. I am unstoppable because of it. Look at yourself. Look at the scars that whisper your story. Do you see weakness, or do you see proof that you survived, adapted, and became more than they ever imagined? Pain became my teacher. Betrayal became my textbook. Suffering became my forge, and I am steel tempered in the fires they lit for me. I am no longer a victim. I am the blacksmith. I am the weapon. I am the storm they cannot predict. Let them try to break me. Let them try to bend me. Let them try to burn me again. I have learned the language of fire, and now fire obeys me. Silence turned into strategy. Silence is not absence. It is observation. It is patience. It is the calm before the strike. I learned that long before I ever drew a sword or even raised my voice. The world expects reaction. It thrives on chaos. It mistakes noise for power, but I discovered something different. Silence is power. I stopped reacting, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but out of intent. I watched, I listened, I measured. Every word they spoke revealed more than they knew. Every action betrayed a truth they thought hidden. Every gesture, every pause, every glance became a map. I stopped being a participant. I became the observer, the quiet eye in the storm. And from that vantage, I learned their patterns. I saw their flaws, their arrogance, their fragile egos masquerading as confidence. People reveal themselves when no one challenges them. They think silence is retreat. They think patience is surrender. They believe stillness is ignorance. They are wrong. Silence forces them to fill the void, and when they fill it, they expose themselves. I let them speak. I let them boast. I let them attack with words, with pride, with overconfidence. I let them dig their own graves. Every lie they told, every deception they attempted, every misstep they took, they left it for me to see. And I saw it. I cataloged it. I analyzed it. I turned every weakness into a lesson. I became a student of their chaos, a general studying the battlefield of human ambition. Every ego inflated by pride, every insecurity hidden by bravado, revealed to me in the quiet. I did not intervene. I did not argue. I did not react. I waited, because impatience is a weapon for the weak, because haste blinds the mind, because reaction is a trap. The strongest move is often no move at all. I observed them carefully. I watched how they tried to manipulate, how they tried to control, how they thought their words carried weight, and in the stillness I built advantage. They made mistakes I would never have made in my haste. They overestimated their control. They underestimated my awareness. I turned their assumptions against them. I let their arrogance become a tool. Their impulsiveness became a ladder for me to climb. They didn't see the trap. They didn't know they were giving me everything I needed. Silence is not empty. Silence is the canvas where strategy is painted. Every omission is a stroke. Every pause is a contour. Every inaction is a design. I began to move inside their minds without them knowing. I planted uncertainty. I seeded doubt. I turned their confidence into confusion. They questioned themselves before I ever questioned them. They hesitated where hesitation was fatal. They faltered where faltering meant exposure. Intellectual dominance. I didn't need to show force. I didn't need to wield a weapon. I didn't need to shout or command. Control is mental first. Control is psychological. Control is making them think the battlefield belongs to them while you orchestrate every move. I became invisible authority, the quiet power in the room they could not touch, the unseen weight pressing down on every decision, every choice, every step they took. I discovered the beauty of invisibility, not in being unnoticed, but in being unstoppable while unnoticed. They gave me their weaknesses freely. They handed me their strategies in the form of hubris. They revealed their true selves in moments they thought I was blind. I was never blind. I saw everything. Every truth they tried to hide. Every lie they tried to sell. Every intention they thought buried. And I stored it, cataloged it, prepared it, because strategy is patience, because strategy is precision, because strategy is knowing exactly when to strike and when to remain silent. I didn't rush. I didn't force the hand. I let time work for me, and time is cruel to the careless. Every opponent has a rhythm. Every adversary has a predictable pattern. Every challenger exposes themselves in repetition. I became the predator of patterns, the student of habits, the architect of their unraveling. Silence became a weapon more deadly than any sword. more precise than any arrow, more terrifying than any scream, because it is unseen, because it is misunderstood, because it operates in the space between thought and action where humans are most vulnerable. I watched them scramble. I watched their false confidence crumble. I watched arrogance crack under pressure, and I stayed still, calm, collected, always observing. Every hesitation they offered, I converted into leverage. Every lie they crafted, I stored as intelligence. Every attempt to provoke me became the blueprint for their defeat. I didn't just survive their schemes, I mastered them, I controlled them. I turned their own tactics against them because silence is active. Silence is strategy. Silence is dominance cloaked in patience. The battlefield shifted without anyone noticing. The rules changed while they argued over trivialities. They raced, they shouted, they stumbled, and I was already 3 moves ahead. They never knew the war had already begun, and in that silence I became unstoppable. Because strategy does not shout. Strategy does not need recognition. Strategy does not wait for validation. It waits for the perfect moment. It calculates, it strikes. And when it strikes, it leaves nothing standing. I was that strategy. I became it. I wielded it without mercy, without remorse, without warning. And they, my enemies, my doubters, my betrayers, they fell into my design, blind to the precision of my silence, unaware that every misstep they made was part of the symphony I orchestrated in quiet. Silence became intellect. Silence became power. Silence became victory. I do not need to shout. I do not need to provoke. I do not need to react. Because I see, because I know, because I wait. And when the moment comes, they will see it too. Not the strike, not the weapon, not even the power, only the consequence of underestimating silence. And by then it will be too late to hide, too late to apologize, too late to fight back. Silence has already won. I have already won. The battlefield is mine. The mind is mine. The victory is mine. Because I learned the greatest truth of all. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. And strategy is unstoppable. I learned the power of being unseen. They thought they knew me. They thought they had me figured out. They believed that if they could see me, understand me, categorize me, control me, they could predict me. They were wrong. I learned early that visibility is a weapon they use against you. To be seen is to be judged. To be seen is to be boxed in, labeled, contained. To be seen is to be understood, and understanding is control. And control is a chain. I used to fear the unknown. I used to crave clarity, explanation, recognition. I wanted people to see my strength, my brilliance, my intentions. I wanted them to acknowledge my power. But the more I revealed, the more they underestimated me. The more they thought they had me, the tighter they gripped, and the more I slipped through their fingers. Unseen, unheard, unpredictable. I discovered the terrifying advantage of quiet. The world fears what it cannot anticipate. It trembles in the presence of uncertainty. It recoils from what it cannot measure, cannot name, cannot control. I became that. I learned to move in the shadows of attention. I learned to act without fanfare. I learned that a whisper can unsettle more than a shout. A glance can dismantle more than an accusation. Presence does not demand volume. It demands intention, focus, awareness. The loudest threat is predictable. The silent one ends you. Every battle I've faced, every confrontation I've survived taught me this. The ones who scream, who boast, who brandish their power, they make mistakes. They telegraph every move. They announce their intentions. I let them. I watched them fall into their own hubris. I watched their certainty blind them to what was coming. I did not strike in the open. I struck where they never expected. I struck in the silence. And when they realized the attack, it was already over. Being unseen is not cowardice. It is strategy. It is patience. It is a weapon far deadlier than any sword, any spell, any threat. I became the unknown they feared. I became the variable they could not calculate. I became the shadow at the edge of their vision, the question in their mind, the doubt in their certainty. And fear is contagious. When you move unseen, when you choose silence over noise, unpredictability over clarity, hesitation replaces arrogance. Doubt creeps into the strongest hearts. Panic seeps into the proudest minds. The loud falter, the brash stumble. Because they are predictable, but I am not. I do not follow patterns they can anticipate. I do not give them the satisfaction of expectation. I do not answer the questions they pose. I do not play their game. I am outside it. And from that place I become unstoppable. I have learned the power of watching without being watched, of moving without being noticed, of striking without warning. The unseen presence is terrifying. A room filled with noise can be controlled. A room filled with chaos can be mastered, but a room in which the silent observer waits, that is a room where fear becomes tangible. I have cultivated that fear. I have harnessed it. I have made it a weapon pointed at anyone foolish enough to challenge me. They search for me in predictable places. They wait for me to make noise. They expect me to reveal myself, to give them leverage. I give them nothing. Nothing but my quiet. Nothing but my patience. Nothing but my control. And that is enough. Being unseen is power. Being silent is dominance. Being unpredictable is liberation. The loud, the obvious, the brash, they burn themselves out. They exhaust their energy, their influence, their advantage. I conserve mine. I sharpen mine. I use it at the exact moment they are weakest, most unprepared, most vulnerable. I have become the storm they do not see coming. I have become the blade they cannot anticipate. I have become the shadow they cannot escape. And in that shadow, I am free. Free from expectation, free from manipulation, free from the chains of recognition. I learned that the world fears what it cannot comprehend. It fears the unknown. It fears unpredictability. It fears the silent presence that observes, calculates, and waits. That fear is a weapon. I wield it without apology, without hesitation, without mercy. The unseen move first. The silent dominate. The unpredictable control the game. And when they finally notice, it is already too late. The battlefield has shifted. The rules have changed. Victory is inevitable. The loudest threat is predictable. The silent one ends you. I am the silent one. I am the unseen. I am the unpredictable. And those who mistake visibility for power will learn in time that presence is not volume. That attention is not influence, that the quiet observer is the one who always wins. I have learned the value of invisibility. I have learned the weight of patience. I have learned that fear of the unknown is a weakness only they possess. I am beyond it. I am beyond prediction. I am beyond control. I am beyond their reach. And from the shadows I rise, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. Because the loudest threat is predictable. The silent one ends you, and I have already ended them. I am the silence. I am the shadow. I am the storm. And they will never see me coming. I became comfortable being misunderstood. I stopped trying to explain. I stopped bending, twisting, shaping my words to fit the expectations of ears that could never truly hear me. For years, I tried to justify my choices. I tried to frame my intentions. I tried to translate my fire into something digestible, something acceptable. And for what? Every explanation was twisted. Every word returned to me, distorted, weaponized. Every truth became a lie in their hands. I realized then they would never understand. Not because I wasn't clear, not because I wasn't sincere, but because understanding requires willingness, and they were not willing. And that truth was liberating. I became comfortable being misunderstood. It is not weakness. It is not defeat. It is a strategy. When they misjudge you, when they misinterpret, when they assume, they underestimate. And being underestimated is power. I let go of the need for approval. I let go of the hunger for validation. I let go of the desperate urge to make everyone see what I see, to make everyone feel what I feel. I chose outcome over opinion. The world will whisper its judgments. It will label, it will mock, it will dismiss. It will try to shape you into something small, something safe, something known. Let it, because the ones who are too loud, too visible, too eager for approval, they become predictable. They become fragile. They become limited by the perceptions of others. I, on the other hand, became untethered. I anchored myself in purpose, not perception. I measured success not by applause but by results. I built strength not by consensus but by conviction. And the calm that comes from that, the calm, it is a quiet storm within. It is a steel forged in silence, tempered in patience, sharpened by observation. It does not tremble at judgment. It does not shatter under criticism. It does not waver when misunderstood. Being misunderstood becomes a shield. They think they know me. They think they can predict my moves. They think my intentions are transparent. They are wrong, because I have stopped giving them maps. I have stopped lighting their way. I have stopped explaining the paths I will take. Let them misinterpret. Let them gossip. Let them form their shallow assumptions. I am busy building. I am busy moving. I am busy becoming. And in that space, in that freedom from the need to justify, I find clarity. I find power. I am no longer reactive. I am deliberate. I am measured. I am patient. I am the calm in the storm. The shadow they cannot read. The silent force they cannot predict. Being misunderstood is no longer a frustration. It is an ally. I became comfortable with it. I embraced it. I allowed it to sharpen me, to strengthen me, to define me in ways that approval never could. The opinions of others are smoke, transient, fleeting, meaningless unless you choose to breathe them in. I chose not to. I chose results over recognition. I chose action over explanation. I chose calm over chaos, and that choice solidified me. I became immovable. I became untouchable. I became the force they could never fully comprehend, because those who need understanding to measure worth will always be blind to the unseen. Those who demand explanation will never see the precision of intention. Those who judge before knowing will always fall behind. I am beyond their comprehension. I am beyond their need for labels. I am beyond their assumptions. I am beyond the limits they try to place on me. I became comfortable being misunderstood, and in that comfort I found freedom. Freedom to act without hesitation. Freedom to pursue without apology. Freedom to rise without validation. I do not need them to see me. I do not need them to approve me. I do not need their understanding, because I understand myself. I know my power. I know my intent. I know my direction. And that knowledge, that clarity is enough. Let them whisper. Let them misjudge. Let them assume. I am already beyond it. I have already chosen my path. I have already built my empire in the silence of their misunderstanding. Being misunderstood is no longer a weight, it is a weapon. A weapon I wield with precision, patience, and absolute control. I became comfortable being misunderstood. They felt the shift before they saw me. I did not announce my return. I did not make noise. I did not demand attention. And yet they felt it. Something changed before I ever appeared. The air grew heavier. The room felt smaller. The silence became uncomfortable. They couldn't explain it. That was the worst part, because fear with a face can be named. Fear with a sound can be tracked, but fear with no source, that eats from the inside. They felt the shift before they saw me, before a word was spoken, before a shadow crossed their path, before my name was even whispered again. Something in their instinct stirred. You know that feeling. That moment when your body reacts before your mind understands. When your pulse changes for no logical reason. When laughter fades mid-sentence. When confidence hesitates. That's not imagination. That's recognition. Power doesn't always enter loudly. True power alters the environment. I didn't need to declare myself strong. I didn't need to remind them of the past. I didn't need to replay old victories or old wounds. The energy spoke for me. They began to feel watched without eyes. Threatened without threat, uneasy without cause. Conversations changed tone. Voices lowered. Jokes died halfway through the punchline. Not because they knew I was back, but because something inside them knew. The body always knows before the mind is ready to admit it. They told themselves it was nothing. They blamed stress. They blamed exhaustion. They blamed coincidence. But fear does not lie. Fear recognizes patterns the ego refuses to see. They remembered me without remembering me. They felt consequences before the cause arrived. That's what happens when someone returns transformed. The version they defeated no longer existed. The version they underestimated was gone. The version they thought they understood had been burned away, and what replaced it could not be measured the same way. I did not radiate anger. I did not carry desperation. I did not leak insecurity. Those are loud emotions, predictable emotions, easy to exploit. What I carried was calm. And calm terrifies people more than rage ever could, because rage wants something. Rage can be provoked. Rage can be manipulated. Calm means the decision has already been made. They sensed it in small ways, a sudden hesitation, a second glance, a tightening in the chest. They couldn't explain why their confidence felt thinner, why their dominance felt less certain, why victory suddenly felt temporary. Power sensed, not declared, rewrites the room. I did not need to speak. My silence became pressure. They filled that silence themselves with assumptions, with worst-case scenarios, with memories they thought they had buried. The mind is cruel when left alone with fear. They started replaying moments. Every time they dismissed me, every time they laughed, every time they thought I was finished. And now I wasn't there to confirm or deny any of it. That uncertainty hollowed them out. Because when power announces itself, you can prepare. But when it arrives quietly, you don't know where to stand. You don't know what move is safe. You don't know what mistake will be fatal. I let them sit with that. I let the environment do the work for me. I let their instincts unravel their confidence piece by piece. I did not need to intimidate. I simply existed differently. My presence no longer sought validation. It no longer asked permission. It no longer explained itself. And that shift was unmistakable. They began to overthink, second guess, hesitate where they once acted freely. Their rhythm broke. People talk about dominance as something loud, aggressive, obvious. They are wrong. Dominance is when others adjust themselves around you without you asking, when their behavior changes before you say a word, when their plans shift because of a possibility, when their certainty dissolves in your absence. I watched it happen, quietly, patiently, not with satisfaction, with clarity. This was no longer about revenge. This was about gravity. Heavy things don't chase, they pull. And they felt that pull before they ever saw me. Their bravado became brittle. Their alliances felt weaker. Their control slipped, not all at once, but enough to be noticed, enough to be felt. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, something is wrong. Sometimes it says, be careful. Sometimes it says nothing at all and just tightens its grip. That's the kind of fear I brought back with me. Not the fear of violence, not the fear of confrontation, the fear of inevitability. Because deep down they knew something had returned that could not be managed the old way. Something that had learned, something that had adapted, something that no longer needed approval or reaction to exist. They felt smaller without knowing why, less certain without understanding how, exposed without seeing the blade. I didn't need to prove anything. Proof is for those who still seek permission. I let my restraint speak. I let my patience echo. I let my silence announce what words never could. They felt the shift before they saw me, and by the time they finally did, it was already too late. because fear introduced me long before I arrived. The ones who mocked me started watching me. There was a time when my name was a joke, when my ambition was entertainment, when my silence was mistaken for weakness. They laughed freely back then, loudly, carelessly. They laughed because they believed the story they told themselves, that I was finished, that I was harmless, that I would never rise beyond the limits they assigned me. Mockery is easy when you feel safe. Arrogance is loud when it has never been challenged. They spoke over me, around me, about me, as if I wasn't there, as if I didn't hear, as if I didn't remember. But listen to me now. Laughter doesn't vanish all at once. It thins first. It hesitates. It checks the room before it dares to exist. And that's when I knew things had begun to change. Because ridicule doesn't turn into respect overnight. It turns into attention first. They stopped laughing, and they started watching. At first, it was subtle. A glance held a second too long. A conversation paused when I entered. A sudden interest in what I was doing without asking. They told themselves it was curiosity. They lied. Curiosity doesn't carry tension. Fear does. They watched because something no longer made sense. The version of me they had memorized didn't match what they were seeing. Their old conclusions didn't fit the new evidence, and nothing unsettles arrogant people more than being wrong. They had built their confidence on my failure. Their jokes needed me to stay small. Their identity required my limits. And now I wasn't playing my assigned role. I didn't announce growth. I didn't demand acknowledgement. I didn't confront them. I simply became undeniable. That's when attention replaced ridicule. They started tracking my movements, my decisions, my silence. Because silence, once mocked, had become suspicious, they wondered what I knew, what I planned, what I was waiting for. They watched, they waited, they worried. Arrogance is bold when it feels superior, but superiority dissolves the moment it senses competition. Their tone changed, the jokes softened, the confidence cracked. They stopped underestimating me publicly, then privately, and eventually they stopped underestimating me at all. They became careful, careful with their words, careful with their assumptions, careful with their moves, because when someone you dismissed stops reacting, stops explaining, stops seeking validation, you don't know where you stand anymore. They used to think I needed them, their approval, their recognition, their acknowledgement. They were wrong. The moment I stopped needing their opinion lost its power. That terrified them, because power dynamics don't collapse with confrontation. They collapse when relevance disappears. I wasn't trying to impress. I wasn't trying to prove. I wasn't trying to be seen, and that absence of hunger made them uneasy. People trust ambition they can see. They fear ambition that no longer needs witnesses. They watched me move without seeking applause. They watched me advance without asking permission. They watched me build without announcing milestones, and they didn't know how to respond. They watched, they waited, they worried. Every success I didn't brag about haunted them. Every silence after a win unsettled them. Every calm reaction where they expected emotion shook them, because arrogance relies on reaction. Mockery feeds on response, and I gave them nothing. I let them sit with their uncertainty. I let them rewrite their assumptions on their own. I let their imagination do more damage than my actions ever could. They began to overanalyze, to interpret, to read between lines that weren't even there. They feared what they couldn't predict. That's when the balance shifted. The same mouths that once laughed now went quiet when I spoke. The same eyes that once ignored me now tracked my presence. The same people who once dismissed me now measured themselves against me. And still, I said nothing, because dominance doesn't argue, it doesn't correct, it doesn't beg to be understood. Dominance allows others to realize the truth on their own. They watch me with caution now, not admiration, not respect, caution. The kind that comes when you realize someone has outgrown your control. They worried about what I would do next, about how far I would go, about whether they were still ahead or already behind. They watched, they waited, they worried. And the more they watched, the more they saw something they couldn't dismantle. Consistency, discipline, a quiet certainty. I wasn't rushing, I wasn't panicking, I wasn't reacting to them at all. That's what broke them, because mockery needs an audience, and attention needs control. But I gave them neither. I existed on my own terms now. Their arrogance had nowhere to land. Their superiority had nothing to stand on. Their past assumptions collapsed under present reality. And suddenly, they were the ones adjusting. They measured their words around me. They weighed their actions. They questioned their confidence. They started calculating risk. The ones who once laughed now wondered if they had misjudged me too late. The ones who once dismissed me now feared being dismissed themselves. That reversal didn't come from aggression. It came from growth. Silent, relentless, unapologetic. I didn't need to remind them of the past. Their memory did that for me. Every old joke echoed louder in their heads now. Every careless word replayed with regret. Every moment they underestimated me became a warning. And still I stayed calm, because victory doesn't need commentary. They watched me because they no longer understood me. They waited because they no longer controlled the outcome. They worried because they no longer felt safe in their assumptions. They watched, they waited, they worried, and that was the final shift. Not when they respected me, not when they feared me, but when they realized they could no longer ignore me. Because being mocked means you are seen as weak. Being watched means you are seen as dangerous. And I had crossed that line without ever announcing it. Look at yourself now. Think back to the ones who laughed when you were struggling, who doubted when you were quiet, who mistook patience for passivity. Let them watch, let them wonder. Let them worry, because when mockery turns into attention and arrogance turns into caution, you are no longer chasing power. You are becoming it. My presence became uncomfortable. They used to speak over me. They used to take up space like I wasn't even there, like my presence was optional. That changed. Not with words, not with confrontation, not with explanation. I didn't announce it. I didn't demand acknowledgement. I simply existed differently, and the room noticed. Confidence doesn't ask permission. It doesn't explain itself. It radiates. I walked in, and it shifted. They felt it before they saw it. The air thickened. Eyes darted. Movements became measured. I had become a force that didn't need to act to dominate. I didn't have to speak to claim space. I didn't have to argue to assert authority. My silence alone questioned theirs. My calm alone challenged their control. My certainty alone unseated their confidence, and they began to shrink, not physically. Not visibly, but in presence, in spirit, in every little assertion they once made against me. They shifted backward unconsciously, as if to make room for a weight they hadn't accounted for. I became unavoidable, a shadow eclipsing light. The metaphor is simple, but the effect is devastating. Light demands attention, but shadows consume it. Shadows don't plead to be seen, they just are, and that presence unsettled them. I didn't need to compete. I didn't need to prove anything. The mere fact of my existence, the certainty in my stance, the patience in my eyes, all of it became a question they couldn't answer. Because power that doesn't beg a power that doesn't explain power that doesn't move like theirs is terrifying. They measured me. They guessed at my intentions. They second-guessed their own assumptions. Authority had been assumed in that room. It had been dictated by volume, by ego, by spectacle. But I was rewriting the rules without a single word. My presence spoke instead. And it said, I am here, I am certain, I am not yours to diminish. And slowly, inevitably, they began to adjust. Every hand gesture became smaller, every smile more calculated, every laugh carefully weighed. I didn't have to tell them, I didn't have to demand respect. I didn't have to assert dominance. I simply held the space I belonged to, and their discomfort filled the void around me. It was quiet, It was subtle. It was unstoppable. The shadow doesn't shout. It doesn't clash with the light. It simply consumes it, and that is what I had become. A presence they could not ignore, a weight they could not lift, a power they could not challenge. It's intoxicating, not in the sense of arrogance, but in the realization that their stability, their illusions of control, all rested on assumptions now crumbling beneath my calm. I saw them adjust. I saw them second guess. I saw them shrink in ways they didn't even realize, and I felt no need to rejoice, no need to gloat, because this is the quiet victory, a presence that unsettles without a single action, a shadow that eclipses light, a power recognized without declaration. Every room I enter now carries its own tension. Every conversation carries its own weight. Every glance carries its own meaning. I am no longer measured by their expectations. I am no longer defined by their opinions. I am no longer constrained by their comfort. They feel it before I speak, before I act, before I move. My presence alone demands attention, demands respect, demands space, and they don't like it, because authority that cannot be argued with, confidence that cannot be shaken, dominance that cannot be contested is unbearable. They look at me now and they see someone who doesn't need them, someone who doesn't depend on them, someone who cannot be measured, and that makes them uneasy. Every step I take reverberates further than I intend. Every silence I hold expands the gap between us. Every glance I give reflects the truth they cannot face. I am not here to fit into their system. I am here to define my own. I am here to exist as I see fit. I am here as the weight of certainty, as the shadow that eclipses their light. They adjust, they hesitate, they falter. They do not move first. I do not move last. I simply am. And that is more powerful than anything I could have spoken, because the loudest voice in the room can be ignored. The most aggressive hand can be pushed aside. The most brilliant performance can be undervalued, but a presence, silent, unwavering, unchallenged, cannot be denied, and now they know it. Their discomfort is proof of my ascendance. Their hesitation is proof of my dominance. Their shrinking is proof of what happens when someone stops asking for permission to exist. My presence became the measure, not my words, not my actions, but the undeniable weight of who I have become, and they feel it before I speak, before I act, before I even notice them at all, because a shadow does not need permission. A shadow does not need recognition. A shadow simply eclipses. And I am that shadow now. They adjust, they hesitate, they shrink, and I remain absolute, unmoved, unshaken, undeniable. Their light may still flicker, but it cannot escape the shadow I have become, because presence, true presence, is not earned. It is claimed, it is embodied, and it cannot be stolen. I have claimed it, I have embodied it, and I stand. As the weight they cannot carry, as the shadow that eclipses all their assumptions, as the certainty that makes them small. They feel it before I even arrive, before I even speak, before they realize they are beneath me. And in that silence, their unease becomes my domain. Their shrinking becomes my territory. Their fear becomes proof I am here. I am undeniable. I am the shadow eclipsing light. And they are just watching, waiting, uneasy, powerless, because I no longer move for them. I move for myself. And that is unstoppable. The moment they realize they lost control, there is a moment. It is quiet, almost invisible. It doesn't arrive with chaos. It doesn't come with shouting or collapse. It comes with a pause, a hesitation, a fraction of a second where certainty cracks. That's when they realized they had lost control, not because I took it, not because I challenged them, not because I announced anything, but because it was no longer theirs to hold. They used to dictate the rhythm, the pace, the tone. They decided who spoke, who mattered, who waited, and then something changed. They spoke and the words didn't land. They asserted and the room didn't follow. They reached for authority and found only air. That was the moment. The moment their power stopped working. You could see it in their eyes, that brief flicker of confusion. That split second where they checked the room as if asking permission they used to command. They didn't say it out loud. They couldn't. But inside, something whispered, "Why isn't this working anymore?" They tried again, louder, sharper, more force. And that's when the truth revealed itself. Control that needs force is already gone. I didn't oppose them. I didn't disrupt them. I didn't resist. I stood still. And in that stillness, their authority collapsed under its own weight, because control only exists as long as someone believes in it. And I no longer did. That's the secret they never understand. Power is not taken in a fight. It evaporates when belief is withdrawn. They spoke. I listened, but I did not yield, and they felt it. Their words grew longer, their explanations deeper, their tones strained. Control was slipping, and they didn't know how to stop it. They needed reaction. They needed validation. They needed resistance. I gave them none, and without resistance, their dominance had nothing to push against. Look closely at that moment. The instant a ruler realizes the throne is symbolic. The instant a commander realizes the army is watching, not following. That's what happened. They weren't defeated, they were exposed. Their authority was revealed as a performance dependent on compliance, and I had withdrawn mine. Suddenly, they were over-explaining, over-correcting, overreaching. They tried humor. It fell flat. They tried intimidation. It rang hollow. They tried logic. It sounded desperate, because the room was no longer theirs, not because I claimed it, but because they lost it. You see, real power doesn't tighten its grip when threatened. It relaxes. Only insecurity clenches. And now they were clenching. Their movements became sharp, their breathing shallow, their eyes restless. They started watching me the way prey watches the horizon. That's when they knew. They were no longer the center. They were reacting. And I was not. This is the turning point most people miss. They think dominance is loud. They think control is obvious. It is. True control is invisible. It is felt when others adjust without being told. And now they were adjusting to me. Their decisions slowed. Their confidence fractured. Their certainty leaked away. They waited for my reaction, for my approval, for my signal, and I gave them none. I let the silence do what words never could. I let uncertainty infect them, because uncertainty spreads. It multiplies. It eats away at every structure built on assumption. They began to question themselves, then each other, then the situation. Control cannot survive that. You can't command doubt. You can't intimidate uncertainty. You can't dominate a room that no longer believes you belong at the top. And I watched it happen, not with pleasure, not with malice, with clarity, because this was not revenge. This was inevitability. They had built power on noise, on repetition, on being the loudest presence, and I had become something quieter, heavier, unavoidable. Their control required participation. Mine did not. And in that imbalance, everything collapsed. The room shifted toward me without realizing why. Eyes followed my silence. Attention bent in my direction. Energy reorganized itself around my calm. They noticed. That's the worst part. The exact moment someone realizes they are no longer in control, and there is nothing they can do to reclaim it without exposing how fragile it always was. They froze, because any move would confirm the loss, so they hesitated, and hesitation is surrender dressed as thought. I didn't step forward, I didn't speak. I let their stillness say it for them. They had lost control, and they knew it. From that moment on, everything they did was reaction. Everything I did was optional. That is the final inversion of power. When one side must move and the other does not, they were trapped in awareness, aware that the hierarchy had shifted, aware that authority had changed hands without ceremony, without violence, without declaration. Just presence, just certainty, just silence. And now they could never unsee it. Once control is exposed as illusion, it can never be reclaimed in the same form. They could pretend, they could posture, they could shout, but the room had already learned who no longer needed to try. That knowledge lingered, heavy, uncomfortable, and I carried it effortlessly, because I wasn't fighting for dominance. I had outgrown the need. They lost control the moment they realized they were thinking about me while I had already moved past them. That is the moment power changes hands forever. Not with a blow, not with a speech, but with awareness. And once that awareness exists, there is no return. They started breaking without me touching them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't make a move. And yet they started breaking. That's the part no one understands. They think destruction always needs force. They think dominance requires violence. They think collapse comes from impact. No. Some structures fall because they were already hollow. All I did was stop holding them together. I watched it happen slowly, almost gently. At first, nothing looked different. They smiled the same. They spoke the same. They pretended the same confidence, but something underneath had shifted. They were thinking more, second-guessing, replaying conversations that used to pass without weight. Their laughter became delayed. Their confidence became rehearsed. Their certainty started asking questions it was never meant to answer. That's how it begins. Not with panic, with awareness. They began to feel watched without anyone staring, judged without accusation, measured without comparison, because I wasn't confronting them anymore. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't explaining. I was simply present. And presence is dangerous when it carries no need. You see, most people survive by distraction, noise, motion, validation. Take that away and they're left alone with themselves. That's when the cracks show. They started speaking faster, filling space, justifying things no one questioned. Guilt has a sound, it rushes. Fear has a rhythm, it stutters. Insecurity has posture, it overcompensates. I didn't point any of it out. I let them hear it themselves. They began projecting, accusing, misreading silence as threat. Because when people are unstable inside, they assume danger everywhere. They watched me carefully now. Not with arrogance, with concern, trying to read my face, my pauses, my stillness. They needed to know what I was thinking, and I gave them nothing. That's when their minds turned against them. They started remembering things they had buried, things they had justified, things they had told themselves didn't matter, moments of betrayal, small manipulations, quiet cruelty dressed as necessity. All the things they never faced because no one ever made them, until now. Not because I accused them, but because my silence removed their excuses. There was no enemy to fight, no argument to win, only reflection. And reflection is brutal to those who built themselves on denial. They began to fracture internally, one part trying to maintain control, another part whispering truth. You could see it in their eyes, that distant look, that moment of hesitation before every decision. They were no longer sure who they were pretending to be. Power doesn't collapse from attack. It collapses from contradiction, and now they were full of it. They told themselves they were strong, but felt weak. They told themselves they were right, but felt exposed. They told themselves they were in control, but kept watching me. That's not dominance. That's fear wearing authority like armor. I didn't isolate them. They isolated themselves. They grew suspicious of allies, paranoid about motives, defensive over nothing. Because when someone knows they're compromised inside, they assume everyone else can see it too. They started breaking routines, breaking patterns, breaking composure, all without me lifting a finger. That's psychological dominance. Not the ability to harm, but the ability to remain untouched while others unravel trying to understand why. Here's the truth most people never admit. People don't fear monsters, they fear mirrors, and I became one. Not by showing them who I was, but by no longer helping them avoid who they were. They couldn't stand it. Every silence felt like judgment. Every pause felt like exposure. They started confessing without meaning to, oversharing, explaining, defending things no one accused, because guilt demands release, and I was no longer offering comfort. I watched fear surface next. Fear of being seen, fear of being replaced, fear of being insignificant once the noise stopped working. Their confidence cracked under scrutiny. Their bravado shrank under stillness. They were loud before, now they were careful. They were decisive before, now they hesitated. They were dismissive before, now they watched. That's when I knew. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of themselves in my presence, because I wasn't playing the role they needed. I wasn't submissive. I wasn't reactive. I wasn't impressed. I was unmoved. And nothing destabilizes fragile power like indifference from someone it expected to dominate. Let me say this clearly. I didn't attack them. I didn't expose secrets. I didn't threaten. I didn't attack them. I reminded them who they were, and they couldn't survive that reminder, because their identity required performance, required validation, required someone beneath them, and I refused the position. Once that happened, their hierarchy collapsed inward. They turned on each other. On themselves, on their own narratives. You could feel the tension around them now, that tightness, that edge. They were always bracing, always anticipating, always uneasy. Not because I was dangerous, but because they were no longer comfortable with the version of themselves they had built. That discomfort grows. It seeps into decisions, into tone, into judgment. They made mistakes, rushed choices, poor reads, because fear clouds perception and guilt distorts reality. Meanwhile, I remained clear, focused, controlled, grounded. That contrast did all the work. They were breaking under pressure that wasn't applied, only revealed. This is the kind of power no one teaches you, the power of self-possession. The power of being so aligned internally that others feel disorganized around you. The power of restraint. When you don't need to dominate, others expose their need to. When you don't need to prove anything, others reveal how much they've been hiding. They broke because they were already cracked. I simply stopped pretending they weren't. And once someone starts breaking internally, there is nothing external that can save them. No title, no volume, no authority, only truth. And truth doesn't need to shout. It waits, it watches, and it lets people collapse under the weight of everything they avoided becoming accountable for. That's what happened. They didn't fall because I pushed them. They fell because I stopped holding the illusion up for them. And once that illusion shattered, they were left alone with the consequences of who they had always been. That is dominance without violence. That is victory without confrontation. That is power refined enough to destroy without ever touching. Silence spoke louder than revenge. I did not shout. I did not curse. I did not gloat. I said nothing. And that was everything. They expected me to react, to strike, to retaliate, to make my pain known. They expected noise, but I chose silence. At first, they smiled, mocked the stillness, thought it weakness, thought it surrender. How easily they misjudge, how easily they assume the quiet is empty, how easily they forget that storms exist in stillness. I waited, I watched, I let their own arrogance spin the wheel of their downfall. Every insult they whispered, every slight they imagined, every attempt to provoke me, I swallowed it. I did not deny them the satisfaction. I denied them the illusion of control. Silence is a mirror, a reflection of all their noise. All their chaos, all the foolishness they wore like armor, and it crushed them. Because when you are loud, the world expects the fight to be loud. When you are loud, they anticipate retaliation. When you are loud, they believe they understand your power. I showed them a different truth. Power does not need applause. Strength does not need witnesses. Dominance does not need validation. It exists, quietly, irrevocably. Every step they took, I observed. Every glance, every hesitation, I catalogued. Every moment of pride, every flicker of doubt, I stored it like ammunition. But I did not fire, I did not attack, I did not raise my hand. I did not throw their own words back in their faces. I let the weight of inaction do the work. And slowly it did. The guilt they carried, the fear they hid, the insecurity they disguised as confidence, it surfaced. It festered. It demanded acknowledgement. They could not see me strike. They could not anticipate the blow. They could not prepare for the silence itself. And that silence, it was the weapon they never saw coming. No noise, no fury, no storm, just the cold, undeniable presence of someone unshaken. You see, revenge is for those who need validation. Revenge is for those who need applause. Revenge is for those who cannot trust themselves to rise above. I do not need revenge. I need results. I need awareness. I need recognition of power without submission. And nothing communicates that better than calm. They expected fire. They expected fury. They expected me to break. I did not. They expected retaliation. I delivered restraint. They expected chaos. I gave them control over nothing. The effect was devastating. Every doubt I held in check, every shadow of patience I maintained was a mirror reflecting all that they could not control. I did not humiliate. I did not taunt. I did not celebrate. Because cold triumph is not for the eyes of the crowd. Cold triumph is internal, precise. Silent, it does not need acknowledgement. It does not crave attention. It simply exists. And that is what terrifies the unworthy. They start questioning, second-guessing, measuring every interaction, wondering how I am unaffected, wondering why the world still bends to my patience. They cannot understand, they cannot predict, they cannot recover, because they are addicted to reaction. They are dependent on chaos. They are enslaved by their own need for control, and I am free. Silence became my signature. Stillness became my strategy. Restraint became my victory. Every tremor of fear, every hesitation they betrayed, it spoke louder than any insult I could have hurled. It rang truer than any declaration of rage. It resonated farther than any act of retaliation. They learned quickly. You do not need to destroy to dominate. You do not need to attack to win. You do not need to gloat to conquer. Silence can do it all. The loudest words can be empty. The sharpest blade can miss its mark. The most elaborate schemes can crumble. But silence cannot be denied. Silence cannot be deflected. Silence cannot be countered. I let it speak, and it shouted everything they needed to hear. I did not touch them. I did not engage. I simply existed, and that existence was more powerful than any act of vengeance. Victory does not always wear the face of fire. Sometimes it walks softly. Sometimes it breathes quietly. Sometimes it waits. And when it moves with precision. It moves with inevitability. No one needed to see me strike. No one needed to witness my power, because the outcome was already written, and it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the restraint they could not comprehend, the patience they could not endure, the clarity they could not survive. Revenge is loud. Revenge is predictable. Revenge is desperate. Silence is eternal. Silence is unpredictable. Silence is absolute, and that is why it speaks louder than any scream, louder than any gloat, louder than any act of revenge. The world learns eventually. Those who relied on my reaction, they realized it too late. By then it was over, and I never lifted a finger. I simply let silence do what they could not endure. I won, not with chaos, not with fury, not with vengeance. I won with calm, with presence, with the cold, unshakable certainty of someone untouchable. And that is the most terrifying victory of all. I am not the villain, I am the result. They call me a villain. They label me. They assign me a role in their story. But they are wrong. I am not the villain, I am the consequence. Every word they spoke, every betrayal they handed, every act of doubt, of dismissal, of cruelty, I am the sum of all that they unleashed. I am not born of malice. I am born of cause and effect. I am born of their choices, their arrogance, their ignorance. They wanted me broken. They wanted me silent. They wanted me to fit neatly into their narrative of weakness. But I refuse. I refuse to play the part they wrote for me. I refuse to be the monster in someone else's morality tale. I refuse to wear the cloak of guilt that they stitched from their fear. Look closely. I am not evil. I am clarity. I am reflection. I am the mirror they could not shatter. They act and I react, not impulsively, not blindly, but inevitably. They sow chaos, I harvest consequence. They spread lies, I expose reality. They attack, I endure, and I rise. I am not the villain, I am the result. Every defeat they handed to others, every betrayal they attempted on those they thought weaker, it has shaped me, refined me, forged me. I am the steel forged in their fire. I am the shadow cast by their own recklessness. I am the echo of every choice they refuse to own. They cannot understand this because they live in a world of labels: good, bad, right, wrong. They cannot grasp consequence. They cannot comprehend cause and effect. They cannot see that morality is not assigned, it is lived, and their choices have lived long enough to create me. I am their philosophy incarnate. I am the weight of actions ignored, the sum of every betrayal accepted as trivial, the shadow that stretches from every insult, every act of cowardice, every hand turned in betrayal. I did not create this world. They did, and I simply exist within it, as the result, as the consequence. As the undeniable force that emerges when choices go unchallenged and recklessness meets endurance. I am not here to teach them a lesson. I am here to embody one. I am the inevitable, the truth they refuse to see, the response they could not control. They look for someone to blame. They search for the villain. They point fingers. They whisper accusations. They spin narratives to soothe their fear. But I am neither target nor monster. I am the reckoning. The natural outcome of their neglect, their arrogance, their cruelty. They say I am ruthless. I say I am accurate. They say I am cold. I say I am measured. They say I am cruel. I say I am consequential. I am not shaped by vengeance. I am shaped by reality. I am the embodiment of what happens when choices are made without foresight. I am the reflection of cause meeting effect, of action meeting response, of thoughtless deeds meeting their inevitable consequence. Do not misunderstand. I do not delight in their suffering. I do not revel in the imbalance they created. I simply exist. I observe. I manifest what must follow. And because of this, I am powerful. I am unstoppable. I am the force that cannot be negotiated with, the result that cannot be reasoned with, the outcome that cannot be rewritten. They may call me a villain. They may whisper fear into one another. They may pray for reprieve, for mercy, for forgiveness that was never theirs to grant, but I am not here for them. I am here for what is true, for what is earned, for what their choices have created. I am the storm they brought upon themselves. I am the shadow of every action they ignored. I am the mirror in which they see their own failures reflected. And when they finally understand, when the realization hits too late, they will know, not that I was evil, not that I was cruel, not that I was wrong. They will know I am the result. And in that moment, all their accusations will fall silent. All their labels will crumble. All their moral superiority will dissolve. Because the truth is simple and it is absolute. You are not shaped by the titles given to you. You are shaped by the consequences of actions taken. You are measured not by intention but by impact. And I am impact. I am the force that turns negligence into consequence. I am the shadow that follows betrayal. I am the weight of every careless act multiplied and returned. I am not the villain. I am inevitability. I am the answer to every question they refuse to ask. I am the consequence of every choice they ignored. And that is a power no label can contain. I am not here to be loved. I am not here to be feared. I am here to be, to exist, to reflect, to demonstrate. and in the silence of understanding, they will see me for what I truly am, not a villain, not a hero, not right or wrong. I am the result, and nothing more, nothing less. I am the consequence. I am the storm they ignored. They heard the warnings. They just didn't believe them. They saw the signs. They chose comfort instead of clarity. I did not arrive suddenly. I was never a surprise. I was forming long before they noticed, quietly, patiently, relentlessly. I was the pressure building beneath their certainty, the unease they laughed away, the tension they dismissed as paranoia. They thought storms announced themselves. Thunder first, lightning second, fear loud and obvious. They were wrong. Real storms begin in silence. I was the calm they underestimated, the stillness before consequence, the absence of noise that made them careless. They ignored me because I did not beg, because I did not threaten, because I did not perform my pain for their understanding. I adapted, I observed, I grew. They mistook restraint for weakness. They mistook patience for fear. They mistook silence for surrender. And that was their greatest mistake. Storms do not argue. Storms do not explain. Storms do not seek permission. They simply arrive. I watched them build their empires on shortcuts, on borrowed confidence, on the assumption that nothing would challenge them. I watched them mock what they could not control, ridicule what they could not measure, dismiss what they could not dominate, and all the while I was changing, not loudly, not dramatically, but fundamentally. I was becoming inevitable. They ignored the shift because it did not flatter them. They ignored the tension because it did not threaten their comfort. They ignored the storm because it did not yet inconvenience them, until it did. By the time they felt me, it was already too late. Storms don't knock. Storms don't negotiate. Storms don't stop to be understood. They overwhelm. I did not need to announce myself. My presence was enough. Rooms felt smaller. Voices grew quieter. Certainty began to crack. They could not explain it. They only felt it. The air changed. Confidence thinned. Arrogance lost its grip. I had not spoken a word, and yet everything shifted. Because storms are not personalities, they are forces. They don't need approval. They don't seek validation. They do not care who believes in them. They arrive because conditions demand it, and the conditions were perfect. Neglect, complacency, disrespect disguised as confidence. They built this moment brick by brick, lie by lie, shortcut by shortcut. I was simply the result of accumulated negligence. They tried to stand firm, tried to maintain control, tried to convince themselves they were still untouchable. But storms do not respect denial. I did not confront them head on. I surrounded them, slowly, completely. Every certainty they relied on began to erode. Every assumption weakened. Every illusion cracked under pressure. They felt exposed, vulnerable, unprepared, because storms reveal what structures are weak. Storms test foundations. Storms expose what was never built to last, and theirs was never built to endure. They blamed timing. They blamed bad luck. They blamed everyone but themselves, but deep down they knew. They ignored the storm when it was a whisper. Now it was a force. I did not roar. I did not rage. I did not lash out blindly. I advanced with precision, with inevitability, with the calm confidence of something that knows it cannot be stopped. Storms are not angry. They are honest. They strip away decoration. They tear down false strength. They leave only what is real behind. And I was real. I am real. They tried to weather me, tried to wait me out, tried to believe I would pass. But some storms don't pass. Some storms change the landscape forever. I was not here to destroy everything. I was here to reshape it, to remove what was weak, to expose what was false, to leave behind only what could endure pressure. And that terrified them, because they were never built for resistance, only admiration. Only comfort, only control. Storms do not admire. Storms do not comfort. Storms do not obey. Storms take. Storms test. Storms transform. I watched them shrink as realization set in, watched confidence turn into calculation, watched certainty turn into fear. They finally saw me, not as a person, not as an opponent, but as a force they could not outmaneuver. And in that moment, they understood. Ignoring a storm does not make it disappear. It makes it catastrophic. I was the warning they laughed at, the pressure they dismissed, the silence they misunderstood. And now I am the storm they cannot escape. I don't need to chase them. I don't need to threaten them. I don't need to prove myself. Storms don't chase. They surround. They don't convince. They overwhelm. They don't argue. They end debates. And when I finally pass, if I ever pass, nothing will be the same. Structures will be gone. Illusions stripped away. Only truth standing in the aftermath. This is what happens when warnings are ignored, when power is underestimated, when silence is mistaken for weakness. This is what happens when cause meets effect. I am not chaos. I am correction. I am not destruction. I am transformation. I am the storm they ignored, and now they will live with what remains. Let them remember what they created. You wanted a world you could control. You wanted chaos confined. You wanted rebellion tamed. You thought you were architects, builders of fate, masters of consequence, but creation has a way of turning on its creator, and now you are forced to witness it. Look at what you unleashed. Look at the force you underestimated. Look at the storm you thought was contained. You shaped me. You molded the steel of my resolve with your doubts. You tempered my patience with your cruelty. You fueled my fire with your arrogance. Every insult, every betrayal, every whispered dismissal, it became my instruction manual. Every slight, a lesson. Every attempt to break me, a blueprint for power. You chose this, you shaped this, you unleashed this, and now you cannot pretend ignorance. You cannot hide behind excuses. You cannot deny responsibility. Because your creation does not bend. Your creation does not kneel. Your creation does not forgive. I am the product of your negligence. I am the outcome of your hubris. I am the reality you thought would never arrive. You watch and squirm, trying to rewrite the past, trying to whisper away the truth, trying to hope that your hands were clean. But every move you made, every word you spoke, every choice you allowed, it brought me here. You chose this, you shaped this, you unleashed this, and I will remind you. I will make you remember, not through mercy, not through kindness, not through argument, but through presence, through consequence, through inevitability. I do not need to strike. I do not need to raise my voice. I do not need to plead. You feel it, the weight of your own making, the echo of your own decisions. The reckoning you refuse to see coming. You cannot blame luck. You cannot blame circumstance. You cannot blame me. You made me. You forged me in the fires of your neglect and contempt. And now you are left with the result. You chose this. You shaped this. You unleashed this. Look at your world. Look at your power. Look at the cracks that no denial can fill. I am the reflection of your choices, the shadow of your arrogance, the consequence of every lie you told yourself. You wanted control. You wanted certainty. You wanted dominance. You got the truth instead. You chose this. You shaped this. You unleashed this. And there is no undoing it, no rewinding time, no turning back. You will carry it. You will remember it. You will live with it, because creation is not forgiveness. Creation does not apologize. Creation demands recognition. I am your creation. I am the culmination of your errors. I am the echo of your arrogance. And every day I exist, you are reminded you chose this. You shaped this. You unleashed this. Let it burn in your mind. Let it echo in your halls. Let it shadow every step you take, because you made me. And I am not what you expected. I am not what you could ever contain. I am not what you wanted to see. You chose this. You shaped this. You unleashed this. And now you live in the reality of it. They thought I quit. They thought I quit. They thought silence meant surrender. When my voice disappeared, they filled the space with rumors. They whispered stories that made them comfortable. They told each other I was finished, that I had cracked, that I had folded under the weight they placed on me. They smiled when they said my name. They laughed when they remembered my struggle. They nodded in agreement when someone declared he couldn't handle it. They assumed weakness. They always do, because people fear effort more than failure. They fear discipline more than defeat. They fear what it takes to endure quietly. So when I went still, they celebrated. When I stopped reacting, they relaxed. When I withdrew from their noise, they crowned themselves victorious. But while they were talking, I was watching. I saw who grew bold in my absence. I saw who sharpened their arrogance. I saw who mistook distance for disappearance. I was waiting. Waiting does not mean fear. Waiting does not mean confusion. Waiting does not mean loss. Waiting is restraint. Waiting is intelligence. Waiting is the discipline they never had the patience to learn. I was learning. Learning how they move when they think no one is watching. Learning how they speak when they believe they've won. Learning where their confidence is real and where it is stitched together with lies. They never realized the freedom in being underestimated. When they believed I was finished, the pressure disappeared. The expectations dissolved. The noise lost its teeth. And in that quiet, I became dangerous. Every doubt they cast became fuel. Every laugh sharpened my resolve. Every insult refined my focus. They thought their words were weapons. They didn't understand they were tools. Tools to build patience. Tools to harden my resolve. Tools to teach me exactly who they are when they think I am nothing. Freedom lives in the shadow of expectation. When no one is watching, you move differently. When no one believes, you grow without interruption. When no one expects greatness, greatness forms undisturbed. I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to prove anything. I could sharpen myself in silence. They called it disappearance. They called it failure. They called it the end. I called it preparation. I did not quit. I paused. I paused to let them reveal themselves. I paused to let their arrogance mature. I paused to let their certainty lock into place, because certainty makes people careless. Certainty makes them loud. Certainty makes them predictable. They mistook my stillness for loss. They saw no movement and assumed defeat. They heard no response and assumed fear. They felt no resistance and assumed control. They never considered discipline. They never considered strategy. They never considered that silence can be chosen. Stillness is not emptiness. Stillness is pressure held back. While they were celebrating, I was building. While they were talking, I was measuring. While they were convinced, I was evolving. They lived in the moment. I lived in the long game. They wanted proof. I wanted precision. They wanted reaction. I wanted outcome. And that miscalculation. That mistake, it was not small. It was not harmless. It was not temporary. It would become their undoing. Because the most dangerous thing you can believe is that someone has stopped watching. The most expensive assumption is that silence equals surrender. They didn't see the change happening. They didn't feel the pressure building. They didn't hear the shift in the air. They just knew something was wrong too late. I let them think I was done. I let them relax. I let them speak freely. And in doing so, they handed me everything I needed. They gave me their patterns. They gave me their weaknesses. They gave me their blind spots. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need confrontation. I needed clarity. And silence gave me that. I stepped away from the noise, and in that distance, I became sharper than I had ever been. I learned that power doesn't announce itself. It waits. It watches. It decides. They thought I quit. What they never understood is that I was only beginning. Watching them reveal themselves, silence is a mirror. It does not speak. It does not interrupt. It does not correct. It reflects. When I stopped responding, they kept talking. When I stopped resisting, they leaned closer to the edge. When I stopped engaging, they showed me everything. Because people cannot stand quiet. They rush to fill it with truth. Silence pulls the mask from their face without ever lifting a hand. In the absence of challenge, they relax. In the absence of threat, they grow careless. In the absence of resistance, they reveal their nature. I watched. I watched how their tone changed when they thought they were safe. I watched who grew louder and who grew cruel. I watched who needed applause and who needed control. People expose who they truly are when unchallenged. They reveal their fears in jokes, their greed in boasts, their arrogance in certainty. They tell you exactly who they are when they believe you no longer matter. I observed, not with anger, not with urgency, with precision. Every sentence was a fingerprint. Every laugh was a confession. Every careless word was a fracture in their armor. I catalogued who lies to feel powerful, who dominates to feel safe, who humiliates to forget their own smallness. Silence gave me time, time gave me clarity, and clarity woke something in me. The villain they helped create, not born from chaos, not driven by impulse, but sharpened by observation, awake, aware, patient. I began to see patterns where they saw freedom. I began to see weaknesses where they saw dominance, because arrogance repeats itself. Ego leaves trails, and insecurity always overcompensates. They thought silence meant ignorance. They thought it meant absence. They never considered awareness. They never imagined that every word they spoke was being weighed, measured, filed away. They do not know that silence is a weapon. It doesn't strike. It doesn't warn. It doesn't miss. It lets the enemy speak first. They do not see that every boast was a clue. Every threat was a tell. Every insult was an admission. They built a map with their own mouths, a map leading straight to their downfall. I didn't need to provoke them. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to expose them. I let them expose themselves. Because when people believe they are unopposed, they stop guarding the truth. They show you where they are fragile. They show you where they are desperate. They show you exactly where to apply pressure without ever touching them. I learned that listening is more dangerous than shouting. That restraint is sharper than rage. That silence is not empty. It is loaded. They spoke freely. I listened carefully. They thought they were winning. I was studying. And by the time they realized they had said too much, I already knew everything. I am the consequence. I am not here to beg your forgiveness. I am not here to justify myself. I am not here to apologize for what you failed to anticipate. I am the end of your calculations. I am the fracture in your control. I am the proof that your world has limits. You wanted answers. You wanted clarity. You wanted certainty. I am neither question nor explanation. I am the outcome, the inevitable, the result of everything you did and everything you refused to do. I am the echo of your failures, the shadow of your arrogance, the weight of every choice you thought would never touch you. I did not become what I am by accident. I became what you made me. Every slight, every betrayal, every dismissal, they built me. They sharpened me. They sent me here. I am the consequence. The ones who underestimated me, the ones who mocked me, the ones who believed silence meant surrender, they learned too late. I am the reckoning that does not announce itself. I am the judgment that does not need witnesses. I am the reality that cannot be negotiated. I am not chaos. I am not evil. I am cause and effect. I am action returned upon its source. I am the law that cannot be broken. I am what happens when arrogance meets persistence. I am what occurs when neglect meets intention. I am the proof that creation does not need guidance, only the space to exist. You see, every empire you built on fear, every tower you raised on pride, every plan you thought unassailable, it crumbles under the weight of your own making. I am the consequence, and there is no escape from me, no cleverness that blinds me, no cunning that bypasses me, no denial that erases me. I am here, I exist, I endure. I am the shadow of every lie you told yourself, the fire forged from every betrayal you offered, the mirror in which you finally see the truth. I am what you shaped, what you nurtured, what you failed to contain. I am the consequence. I will not spare you. I will not bend. I will not pause. I will not show mercy, because mercy was never yours to give. The The world you made, the chaos you ignored, the cruelty you sowed, it all comes back through me. I am your creation, I am your undoing, I am the inevitable, I am the storm you never measured, the shadow you never feared, the force you could never reckon with. I am the consequence. You wanted control, you wanted dominance, you wanted certainty. I am none of those things. I am far more, far greater, far beyond your comprehension. I am what remains when the masks fall. I am what persists when the pretenders falter. I am what endures when the architects fail. I am the consequence. And the world will remember it. History will not forgive it. Time will not erase it. Because I am not an incident. I am not a mistake. I am not a threat to be neutralized. I am the result of everything you created. I am the consequence. And now you live in it. Forever. I no longer seek understanding. I am no longer here to be understood. I am no longer here to explain. I do not bend to validation. I do not bow to opinion. The world wants answers. The world wants reasons. I will give neither. Look at yourself. Look at the scars. Do you see weakness? Or do you see proof that you survived? I survived. I endured. I rose. And I do not owe anyone comprehension. They ask why I act. They demand clarity. They seek the patterns they can digest, the rules they can control. I do not move in patterns they understand. I do not act in ways they can predict. My power is in my unpredictability. My strength is in the calm beneath the storm. I no longer explain the fire in my veins. I no longer justify the storm behind my eyes. Every word I withhold sharpens me. Every silence I hold weighs heavier than any argument. I do not react to their confusion. I do not answer their questions. I do not dignify their expectations. Power does not need an audience. Strength does not require applause. Dominance does not demand comprehension. I am proof. I am living consequence. And that is enough. They want reasons. They want motives. They want the map to my mind. I am not a map. I am a force. I am a shadow crossing the battlefield unseen. I am the silence in the room that shifts everything without a sound. Calm is my weapon. Detachment is my armor. I move like water, flowing, enveloping, unstoppable. Their fear grows not from what I say. Their fear grows from what I do not say, from the space between my actions and their understanding, from the emptiness I leave behind them. I do not explain why I rise. I do not defend why I endure. I do not justify why I dominate. The world seeks answers. I deliver results. I am outcome, not argument. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them question. Let them puzzle over what they cannot comprehend. Their minds twist in search of logic, and they will find none. I give no reason. I need no understanding. I demand none. The calm is not weakness. The silence is not fear. The stillness is the eye of the storm. And from that eye, all power flows. I do not shout. I do not strike prematurely. I do not plead for their recognition. I simply exist. And in my existence, they crumble. Do you feel it? The weight of certainty beneath restraint, the quiet dominance of a presence unchallenged. That is my power, not loud, not obvious, invisible to those who rely on sound, but undeniable to those who feel. I am not here to explain it. I am here to be it. I no longer seek understanding. I no longer seek validation. I no longer need permission. The world may never comprehend me. The world may never forgive me. The world may never see me coming. Good, because power is not in being understood. Power is in being inevitable. Power is in being unmoved by doubt. Power is in knowing calmly that the world bends around you whether it comprehends it or not. I do not justify my choices. I do not defend my methods. I do not explain my presence. I am the consequence of what they could not control. I am the shadow that eclipses their light. I am the storm they failed to predict. And that is enough. Look at me. I do not ask for clarity. I do not demand comprehension. I do not yield to their expectations. I exist. I endure. I dominate. And I need nothing from them. Nothing. Every glance that seeks answers finds emptiness. Every question they pose meets silence. Every attempt to pin meaning upon me fails. I am beyond their reasoning. I am beyond their control. I am beyond their understanding. And in that I am free, free from their judgment, free from their doubts, free from their limitations. I walk unshaken. I move unchallenged. I stand unshaken. They will never understand. And that is the point. I am calm. I am unstoppable. I am the consequence they never anticipated. I am the inevitability they cannot name. I am the shadow that stretches farther than they see. And in my silence, I am louder than all their noise. I no longer seek understanding. I no longer need it. I am complete. I am the power that does not ask, the force that does not explain, the presence that does not yield. I am inevitable. This is my era of silence and strength. This is my era. Not theirs. Not theirs to name. Not theirs to control. This era belongs to me. I do not speak to be heard. I do not act to be noticed. I do not prove myself to anyone. My authority is quiet, yet unshakable. Look at me. See the calm that does not waver. See the patience that does not falter. See the stillness that crushes without a sound. I am not loud. I am not explosive. I am inevitable. Silence is my crown. Silence is my weapon. Silence is the signal of my supremacy. They wait for me to react. They wait for my rage. They wait for my justification. And I give nothing, nothing. Every unspoken word, every withheld action strengthens me. Every gaze that seeks to challenge me bends under the weight of my presence. Every attempt to measure me fails. I am beyond measurement. I am beyond expectation. I am beyond judgment. This is the era of permanence. Transformation is complete. The fire that burned me has forged me. The storm that tried to break me has calmed within me. I carry it now controlled, refined, polished to a brilliance that blinds. I do not need applause. I do not crave recognition. I do not seek validation. The world may see me or it may not. It will feel me. It will tremble beneath the weight of what I have become. I walk through life like a shadow eclipsing the light, not to destroy, but to remind. Remind the world of what power is when it refuses to justify itself. Remind them that calm, that patience, that quiet is more fearsome than any scream. I am godlike in my composure, not arrogant, not boastful, but absolute, unshaken, undeniable. I do not need chaos to assert dominance. I am dominance itself. And dominance does not explain it. The ones who watched me fall, they see nothing now. The ones who mocked me, they whisper in corners, afraid to confront me. The ones who assumed I would bend, they measure shadows and find no weakness. I exist, and that is power enough. My silence stretches like steel across a battlefield. It is not empty. It is full, full of history, full of consequence, full of certainty. Every pause, every withheld reaction, every quiet glance is a strike sharper than a blade. I do not touch, I do not shout. I do not provoke, and yet they fall. I am the culmination of every lesson learned, every betrayal endured, every insult absorbed, every fire survived. I am the product of struggle perfected. I am the result of pain refined. I am the manifestation of strength beyond reason. Do you feel it? The weight of inevitability pressing down, the calm that precedes devastation, the authority that cannot be questioned. That is my era. It does not bend. It does not apologize. It does not fade. I am permanent. I am unmovable. I am untouchable. Not because the world respects me, not because they fear me, but because I have made myself complete, and completeness cannot be denied. The loudest threats crumble before me. The boisterous fall silent. The predictable break under the weight of my quiet. And I do not rejoice. I do not gloat. I simply exist. I am proof that strength does not scream. That authority does not beg. That dominance does not explain itself. This era is mine. No questions, no explanations, no concessions. It is my time, my silence, my strength, and it will endure long after they forget my name. I have become untouchable, unyielding, permanent. The fire that shaped me now burns within me, controlled, eternal, unstoppable. I move with the inevitability of storms. I command without a word. I rule without a throne. Look at me. I do not demand understanding. I do not offer reasoning. I do not apologize for my existence. I am the result of everything they thought they could break. I am the embodiment of the consequences they never saw coming. This is my era. Quiet, absolute, undeniable, power without explanation, strength without apology, authority without question. And anyone who crosses it will feel it, not my fury, not my anger, but the inevitability of my presence. The certainty of my silence, the permanence of what I have become. I do not strike, I do not plead, I do not justify. I am silent, strong, complete and unstoppable. This is my era, and the world will bend around it, whether it sees me or not. You let silence finish the conversation I spoke. You ignored, I shouted. You pretended not to hear. I warned, you laughed, I acted, you dismissed it. And then I went silent, not because I lacked power, not because I lacked will, not because I feared consequence. I went silent because silence is sharper than any blade. Silence is heavier than any chain. Silence is the verdict no one can escape. You felt it first, a pause where my voice used to be, a space where attention used to cling, a void that stretched between your arrogance and your certainty. You searched for my sound, you grasped for my fury, and it was gone. And in that absence, you realized your weakness. You realized the power you underestimated. You realized that I had not moved, that I had not struck, that I had not reacted, that I had already won. I do not need to yell. I do not need to explain. I do not need to justify. You already know the truth. It is etched in your hesitation. It trembles in your gaze. It crumbles in your certainty. I am beyond conversation. I am beyond argument. I am beyond expectation. I am the consequence of every misstep you thought inconsequential. I am the shadow that eclipses your light. I am the calm before the storm you cannot survive. You thought this was a battle of words, a war of opinion, a contest of pride. It was never that. It was never yours to control. It was always mine to conclude. And now it is concluded. I did not need to raise my hand. I did not need to throw a single strike. I did not need to call your name or demand your attention. I simply stood. I simply waited. I simply existed. And the cracks formed on their own. The doubts rose unbidden. The fear festered unchecked. You watched them unravel, and I remained unbroken, still, silent, absolute. You let silence finish the conversation, and it did not ask for mercy. It did not plead. It did not negotiate. It did not apologize. It simply existed. It simply acted. It simply conquered. I am that silence. I am that truth. I am that inevitability. Every insult you hurled, every dismissal you offered, every doubt you planted, they returned to you, polished, refined, relentless. You ignored me when I spoke. You ignored me when I acted. You ignored me when I warned. But silence never lies. Silence never hesitates. Silence never flees. Silence endures. Silence overwhelms. You felt it. The absence where my words once hung. The emptiness where my reaction once threatened. The calm that carried the weight of everything I never needed to say. I spoke. You ignored. I went silent. You listened too late. You let silence finish the conversation, and it did not ask for mercy. It did not pause for reflection. It did not soften for comfort. It struck with inevitability. It imposed with authority. It conquered with the quiet certainty of what was always yours to fear. I am that silence. I am that authority. I am that reckoning. I am the end of what you thought you controlled. And now the conversation is over. The world adjusts to my presence. The earth feels my weight. The air trembles with my inevitability. I did not shout. I did not plead. I did not explain. I let silence finish the conversation, and it did not ask for mercy. You will remember this, every choice you made that led you here. Every slight, every dismissal, every act of pride. You will remember it all. I do not need your understanding. I do not seek your validation. I do not beg for attention. I am complete. I am inevitable. I am eternal. I am silence, and silence does not ask for mercy. I am the consequence. I am the authority. I am the storm that will never pass. I am the shadow that will never fade. I spoke. You ignored. I went silent. You listened too late. You let silence finish the conversation. And it did not ask for mercy. It will never ask again.